I'm on the clock in 10 slow drafts right now. Back from Arizona. Got a little bit of color in the face. Hot down there. I don't know how you guys do it. We're going to make those picks today. We're going to talk about some of the new formats on Underdog and look at the drafts that have finished up, including where I'm heaviest in my current exposures. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. What is up, guys? Hope you enjoyed your vacation. I did. I mean, it was a couple of fun days. I left the family behind. I always miss my girls. I have two daughters, for those of you who don't know. They have school. But my cousin, who I grew up really close with, my mom was very close to their family. They are from Montana. We used to go back to the farm, and all the extended family would come for Christmas and for summers, and I'd get a chance to play with my cousins and an older cousin of mine that I haven't seen since the pandemic. We realized while I was down there, we had hung out in one way or another 3 years in a row right before the pandemic. He had been out to Seattle, was the last time I saw him in 2019. He was down there visiting my brother. And then, I went down there to get some extra slow drafts registered, right? Got some fast drafts in that we can look at today. Got a chance to see my brother. Both my brother and my cousin have wonderful families with 3 boys. So it was a very, all those boys are between like 14 and down to like, I want to say like 6 or 7 is the youngest. Maybe only 5. They got a pool. We played wiffle ball. A lot of fun stuff. Appreciate you guys. Congrats on the 1K subs. Yeah, that happened while I was gone. I was a little, I did some golfing. My cousin's a really big golfer, played college golf. Did some golfing both mornings really early. It's like 105 degrees in Arizona. So you had to go out at like 5 a.m. and get done and get back in the pool when you get back. But yeah, I saw this over the vacation. I was doing a lot of stuff. Didn't really have a ton of downtime. It was fun, quick 48 hours, but fun. Appreciate you guys tuning in from work. Tyler, how's it going? But yeah, really cool to see that it went over 1K already. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's really an awesome thing. I appreciate you guys so much. I just started doing these videos about 2 weeks ago, the Monday. I guess 2 weeks ago from last Monday was my first mainstream. And then it went over 1K, I think that Monday, 2 weeks on the dot, more or less. I had some really old video, 2 really old videos that I didn't really even promote that haven't been really viewed, but got some stuff on there as of, and then it takes 2 weeks to go over 1,000 views. There's also an element to monetization. You guys have talked about, the monetization stuff where you have to have a certain amount of watch hours, and you guys have been awesome about that as well. I hit that already. I'm going through the whatever process of getting my account verified for monetization or whatever, because you have to get 4,000 watch hours or something, which is not a small amount. I had some people, as I was talking through YouTube ideas for the last year or so, people tell me that it might take 6 months and you got to build for this. And that's obviously the expectation, and I expected it to take some time, but these have been some longer streams. You guys seem to like the format. I like to talk, and you guys have hung out for a good amount of time of these streams, and the watch hours have been there too. So really, really appreciate all of you guys. Let's look at a few of these things. So ship chasing today, yes, that will be at 3 Eastern. That's our new time. So that's going to come up here in about 3 hours. I'm going to go for a little bit here this morning. I didn't want to overlap with Lulz if possible. I might end up overlapping a little bit. I know Pete does Lulz right before that show. but we're going to do as much as we can here this morning. And then I'll be back for ship chasing at noon, my time at 3 Eastern. Any interest in doing some puppy Superflex on slow so you can teach us how the F to draft Superflex teams? This is the thing that I told you guys that I was going to enter a bunch of marathons and sprints. I had a little bit of a change of plans for a couple different reasons. One of the reasons is just the lower price point allows you to do a lot more drafts and the lower stuff, but it also means those things fill a lot quicker. And I missed the Superflex contest last year because it filled really fast. It's a little bigger this year, but it was already filling really, really quick. So I did enter 20. And in part because I entered 4 puppy Superflex fasts while I was down there. I wasn't sleeping very well, maybe the sunburns or whatever. I was getting up really early, even though we were golfing early. And so I did a draft before our golf round in the early morning both days. And I found some time, in between all this playing with all my nephews and extended family that I was talking about. I found some time each day to do a draft. The fast drafts are fascinating. I haven't gotten a chance to do a lot of them. Certainly you have to have a little bit of time to be able to do it. It takes an hour. And anytime I'm out of state to go do stuff, I'm either, vacationing or I'm with family or I'm doing something that makes it difficult. I could definitely see where, in my normal life, when I have downtime, when I'm doing laundry or whatever, which I'm pretending I do laundry. My wife's probably listening in the other room laughing at me, but, whatever it is that I'm doing for downtime, that I could definitely do a draft, but it's harder to do when you're like on vacation, right? Or you're visiting someone or doing certain things. But I did find an hour each of the 2 days I was there to fire off one of those. I also got a Greyhound in right when I landed. My brother's church was finishing up and needed me to hang out at the airport for a little bit. So I fired off a Greyhound. I was glad to get into that. That was the single entry tournament, $35 buy-in that closed while I was down there. I didn't know if I'd get down there in time to get into it. I didn't get down there in time to get into the one that was the $6 5 max. Can't remember what the Hound Dog. I was hoping that would be open. That closed in like 24 hours. So these smaller dollar ones, especially, not the Greyhound, but the smaller dollar ones have closed so quickly. I think the Superflex one's going to close relatively quickly. I want to talk about it today for sure. So those of you who are drafting them and enjoying them, will be able to draft. I was a little concerned about entering too many of those slows because we're going to have to do these over the next couple of weeks, and that contest is going to close, and then we're going to be talking about the back end of these Superflex builds when people can't enter them. But there are other Superflex contests out there. Hopefully, Underdog does another Superflex. I imagine they'll do another one later this summer, so it'll be interesting to think through. I love the Superflex format in best ball. I think it's the way that it brings the quarterback strategy in gives you so many different ways to go. And there's so much more about reading the room. There's a huge element for me that I loved about the fast drafts. And the reason I went into Superflex is because you often start out with your QB before the rest of your build, as opposed to the other way around in traditional drafts. Then it helps me do a lot of the correlation that I sometimes, and I was lamenting on some of my streams right before my trip last week, that some of these builds didn't have as much correlation in the back end that I had hoped they would. Some of that was because I started those slows before the schedule even released, and so my early rounds I couldn't really correlate anything in the first like 5 or so rounds, and then I had to try to start to correlate once the schedule released. But having said that, I was lamenting it a little bit at the back end. I love that about the Superflex drafts, that you can, because you hit quarterback first, you can really smartly build then what, front to back, what you're building, where you're going to do your bring backs. In a normal draft, you can do the same thing, but you're setting up a quarterback, and then you sometimes get sniped. And then it's, you have to pivot and those things. So when you start with the quarterback, it's a different game from that perspective. But for me, it's more just with Superflex. It's more about how the drafts can all be different. I did a Superflex draft with Sean Siegel on Stealing Bananas yesterday. That will be one of our upcoming Stealing Bananas episodes. That was a fast draft. It was a very wide receiver heavy room. My first fast draft that I did while I was in there, a very quarterback heavy room. It was the quarterback avalanche. I'm thinking of the wide receiver avalanches. A very quarterback heavy room. And we ended up with a pretty thin quarterback room, thinner than anything I drafted on my own down in Arizona. The first one that I did, was so quarterback light that I ended up tweeting it out afterward and being like, if you get this kind of room, you can take 5 starting quarterbacks if you want, which I did. I took Bo Nix at pick 144. I never saw him go after like 110 in any of my other drafts. Since then, I had 3 other fasts. And then this fast with Sean, he went like in the 90s. And so, maybe that was the huge outlier, the Bo Nix going 144 element. But when you get into those types of rooms, and if you're starting to question like how many QBs are too much, well, quarterback is still a position that has benches, players getting benched. It has injuries. Every year we have about 50 different quarterbacks start games. So you're going to have misses at quarterback. It's a big reason why 3 quarterback builds are still relevant. Even in these 18-round drafts. And they show, like last year, we had a lot of that, a lot of quarterback injuries, and a lot of the people's 2 quarterback builds were just dead. The years where the quarterbacks stay a little bit healthier, the 2 quarterback builds are going to look better. It's really just about how much these quarterbacks get benched and that kind of stuff, or get injured and aren't starting. In Superflex, you can do things a little bit differently. You're going to draft more quarterbacks. You can build in like a contingency element where if a guy misses some time or even gets like a young quarterback gets benched and then comes back later in the year, like we see that with rookies sometimes. They start early, they get benched for a little bit, they come back. That's actually been a kind of common theme for a number of young quarterbacks. You're not like completely screwed in that middle pocket because you have other quarterbacks playing. It's a lot like a 0 RB build in some senses, where you don't need the guy to be starting every single week all year. You need spike weeks at certain times. It's like a handcuff that doesn't have standalone value at the running back position. And there's those types of quarterbacks in the late rounds of Superflex, like Justin Fields is the immediate one that comes to mind, where we don't even necessarily expect a week 1 starting role, and yet he's going to have spike week potential if he does start some games. And there seems to be a pretty solid chance that he does start some games this year. And so thinking through how you build your quarterback room to maximize points at the quarterback spot and the Superflex spot, which doesn't have to be quarterback. So that's the other thing. You can be thin at quarterback because you don't have to play 2 QBs. But I think in rooms where you can get the good prices, you want to be thinking about it that way. Anyway, we'll talk more about the quarterback stuff. We'll look at some of the fast drafts I did. This stuff is really, really interesting. All that quarterback strategy that I'm starting to hit on and talk about, layering that into all the other strategy that continues to exist, structural stuff. One of the big things I did in those super flexes that are 20 rounds is I still did the 2 elite tight ends a couple of times. And if you do that, and you can be done with 2 tight ends still. That's one of the things that I like about some of the other builds that we've done and talked through. And if you do that, then you're freeing up more roster spots to potentially get to, some of these Justin Fields or, Aiden O'Connell type. I drafted him in one because I had a Michael Mayer or a Devontae Adams or something. You can make those swings on those QBs that you don't even expect to start 17 games, and you're not putting them into your build as if they're starting 17 games. They're an additional quarterback, spike week potential. They add some contingency element where if one of your QBs gets hurt and you're like big 3, they're your QB4. Well, they get some late starts, then that's huge, right? Or they get a lot of starts. Maybe they're great. So all that QB strategy makes, I think, the Superflex drafts a lot of fun. That's not the only thing I entered. Most important question from Historical Anomaly says, how many drafts did you enter? I entered 40 this time. I'm going to be honest. I don't love my strategy here because I really wanted to get into more eliminators. I talked to you guys about that. I only got 5 last time. So that was like the one big thing. I saw that the sprint, because it's a little bit of a higher price point, was not really filling particularly fast. And the other higher price points not really filling fast. I'm going to get into those higher price points, I think, in my future runs. I wanted to get into more eliminators, which isn't like at risk of filling anytime soon, but I just wanted to keep building those out. I really enjoy those. And I want to keep doing a steady base of BBMs. So I think I did, but I really wanted to play the puppy Superflex because that's the one I knew that I really like Superflex, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back into on my next trip. I knew that would be filled. So I did 20 of the puppy. I did 10 eliminators, 5 BBMs is all, which I'm like, I should have done at least 10 of those. 5 marathons. Because I think the marathon, it's number one, it's a little bit lower price point, and I also just think it's fun because it's like it's total points. So you are just drafting the best players you think you can. So regardless of context, when we get through my marathon picks, it's going to be me picking the guys that I have the most faith in. And really, it's the upside cases that you believe have like the biggest ceiling because you don't want to draft. Like I had a hard time. I've drafted a ton of Chris Olave, but as I had him in the marathon. I was like, man, I mean, Chris Olave to me is a really high floor play. I think the volume's going to be there, and he definitely has spike week potential. I think he's a great pick in basically any format. But the marathon, I'm like, man, here's a guy who has had ceiling issues so far, and in the current iteration of his offense, they have a new coordinator. But with Derek Carr, he's drawn a ton of volume, but the efficiency hasn't really been there. And when I think about the team that wins the marathon, the total points for the whole season, I'm thinking about the second round pick is the wide receiver 1 overall, right? Or the wide receiver 2 overall. And I think I had a hard time telling myself that Chris Olave could be the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 this season in that Saints offense. I think so it becomes in the marathon, it's funny, but because I think some people say you're not going to necessarily want the breakout plays because we think of like rookies that break out late in the year, but you want full season points. So you want to, you want stability early in the year too. And I think that's fair to a degree, but you want, to win it. Like the guy who won the regular season last year in BBM had Raheem Mostert late, the biggest regular season, full season, late round hit, 21 touchdowns. Raheem Mostert last year in the 15th round. And he had Kyron Williams at the end, the other biggest one, right? Those two guys were massive. You need the players that are the full season defining players, even if they miss time like Kyron did, because it's best ball. Even if they fade late, it doesn't matter. You need the guys that at midseason were like, oh, this is the team that defined 2024. Last year, 2023. I always think back to the year Diggs went to the Bills, and everyone was like, well, they're a really bad passing offense. He went from one bad passing offense to another. And Josh Allen broke out, and their pass rate blew up, and Stephon Diggs was an absolute smash in, the wide. He was going wide receiver 28, and I remember a lot of people have brought up to me that I had a really high ranking on him because I had him very aggressively ranked in the team. I had him wide receiver 16 or something like that year, way ahead of ADP. And so all the stealing signal subs and everybody kind of had a lot of Stephon Diggs. If you're paying attention to me, I had him on a lot of my teams. Actually, that was before stealing signals didn't start until right at the end of that. I was still at CBS at that time. But regardless, somebody that I was really heavily on. I wasn't as on Josh Allen even. But that's the point is the way that the Bills can be or were that season the team that sort of defined the season. Their pass rate and everything was way higher than what people expected, what they were the prior year. They were that breakout team. The Eagles were that the year that A.J. Brown went there 2 seasons ago in 2022. I think the Bills was 2020. I think last year you'd probably argue that the Dolphins were that, maybe. Or is it 2 years ago now that McDaniels took over? McDaniel. I'm a little tired still from my trip, but I guess, yeah. So 2022 is when he took over, but Tua had all the concussions and everything. Anyway, last year you had Mostert, you had Tyreek Hill, shooting for 2,000 yards halfway through the year, all the top teams in the regular season Underdog leaderboard that chased for $1 million, that regular season prize, were Tyreek Hill teams, or a lot of the teams were. I know my best team that was in the top 100 at one point was a Tyreek Hill build. Anyway, you want to get so I think you want to stack up certain offenses in the marathon because you want to make these directional bets on the offenses that define the season. But I also think you want to get just individual players as well that so dramatically outperform expectations that they're the blow-ups. They're the story, right? And so I think the marathon's a really fun one for me to enter, to talk through with you guys, the picks and everything, because it's me saying, like, these are the guys I have the most conviction in could be absolutely superstars this year. Like, I talked to you guys a lot about how I really like Atlanta to be like that type of a team this year. And Bijan's a player that I think I've taken in one of my marathons so far, or maybe a couple, because I mean, I think he could be the legendary running back this year, like the legendary running back. So it's that kind of stuff, and it's really fun to think about the spots that I have the most conviction on. But I did not get into any of the sprints. I do think the sprints are interesting, but I had somebody ask, am I going to talk about all these different formats? Am I going to write them all up like I did the big write up on the Eliminator? I don't think they all have as much like intrigue. So like the marathon, I just talked about like the types of players you wind up picking, but it's very subtle. We all understand total points. The sprint, sort of similar. Our buddy Sacrilegious did a great write-up over at Legendary Upside that I would recommend on the sprint if you're like max entering it, and I think it's a really strong consideration. But for one individual sprint, I don't think it really does. I don't think there's a lot that changes compared to like a regular best ball mania, other than the very obvious, which is that the week 15 and week 16 count toward the overall, like instead of week 17 being all that matters, now you could stack up week 15 matchups just as strongly, or week 16 matchups just as strongly. And so you're trying to find ways in the sprint to stack up weeks 15, 16, and 17 and get as many game stacks and blow ups as you can. And it's all, but it's otherwise it's late season back-weighted production. It's all that same stuff, right? You're trying to advance, and then you want your late season back-weighted production spike week players to hit in weeks 15, 16, 17. I don't think there's like a massive amount of differentiating strategy in the sprint relative to the ways that we talk about and think about, and it's ingrained to think about best ball mania in terms of, again, the back-weighted production and the types of builds and things that work. And the combination of advance rate versus, shooting for ceiling and all of those things. Although, I mean, I think, with the sprint with three teams, with all 3 weeks combined, one of the impulses is maybe to prioritize advance rate a little more and just get your team in there, because, rather than when you're prioritizing advance rate, then you could just die in week 15. You can just die in week 16. But in this one, you advance, you're in. They're all thrown into a pot. So maybe, a little bit more prioritization of that. But I again, the marathon and the sprint, I think are both very, very fun in that they're fairly straightforward. I don't think there's like a lot of complex strategy to dive into there. The best ball, the puppy, but Superflex, I think there's a lot of strategy to dive into. And so that's the biggest reason I did so much of those. And again, with the price point element where I knew it was going to fill quicker, and I just enjoy it and wanted to enter a lot of those. So I did. And the most telling part of that is that's the one I wanted to fast draft when I had a minute. Also because I was like, I might get distracted. And so the $5 price point's nice, but we'll look at some of those teams. Let's jump in and make some picks. My opening monologue here has gone quite long this morning. I haven't been around for a few days, so was fun to chat for a few minutes there. Since I got back, I've been doing these picks by contest a little bit. So first I want to jump in some of the ones that are closing out. So I still have a few of these that are like, this puppy here is still going. This puppy is still going. This puppy, I still have a few of these that are waiting to close from my first batch, but the completed list is now much longer. I had the 4 fasts from Superflex season that I did down there. All 5 of the eliminators from the first batch are done. 34 of the regular drafts are done. So 30. Well, this is one of these is the Greyhound fast. So 33 and 5 is 38 of the 45 have now finished up from the original run. Look at Gabe Davis helping us out. Leaves the channel on for the dogs to watch while he's at work. I appreciate you. Let's jump into this one. This is one of the 7 that is not quite done, and I'm going to finish it right now. It's a 2-6-7. 2 right now. It was a Richardson Goff. Did they play in week 17 last year? Immediately was like, that's the week 17 matchup, but it's not. I think maybe Indy Detroit played in week 17 last year. David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Jalen Wright, Kamani Vidal, Damian Pierce, Braylon Allen is one that read some positive stuff about him from Jets camp. Seems like he's the clear number 2. That seemed like it would be a logjam, but the early report I just read from The Athletic yesterday morning, and so I took him, I think yesterday, was that Braylon Allen is clearly the number 2. That Isaiah Banakanda seems to have fallen down the depth chart, and that Isaiah Davis, the other rookie that they drafted this year, is the only guy really pushing Braylon Allen, but Braylon Allen's been like the star while Breece Hall has been out, and they're probably just holding Breece Hall and keeping him healthy. But the fact that they went and drafted 2 more running backs on top of having a Banakanda last year is not a good sign for a Banakanda. He's a guy that we all really liked in the fantasy community, but I think Braylon Allen is going to become an interesting last-round pick on teams where you don't have Breece Hall. This is sort of a 0 RB build. Started a little bit earlier than some of my other ones with David Montgomery and DeAndre Swift in the double-digit picks still. But it's an Amon-Ra, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs. A lot of vet production there. Devontae Adams and Diggs. Usually not quite so vet-heavy. Xavier Worthy to balance that out a little. Mike Williams, Josh Downs, Wan'Dale Robinson. It's Travis Kelce and Cole Kmet at tight end. So Goff is stacked with Amon-Ra, does not have a San Francisco bring back. Oh, and David Montgomery. Richardson, I only got Josh Downs on. I got Wan'Dale Robinson as the bring back there. I don't have anybody in the queue. I've usually been throwing some names in the queue to kind of give myself an idea of where I want to go. I'm interested. Yeah, see, I wanted to see if Isaac Guerendo, he's the other rookie, and we talked about him a little bit on Stealing Banana, so I won't go into him too much, but I could make this a 2-7-7-2 where I have Amon-Ra, Adams, and Diggs. The thesis on guys like Adams and Diggs is basically they don't hit an age cliff, they stay healthy, and at that point they're 175 target guys potentially. Like Adams had 175 last year, maybe not Diggs quite that amount with the target competition in Houston, but that's a lot of stability at the top. Xavier Worthy, a nice pick. I still don't love Mike Williams, Josh Downs, and Wan'Dale Robinson being the only 3 receivers behind that to make into a 7 wide receiver build. But I do have a lot of question marks at running back. Jalen Wright's the RB3. DeAndre Swift's the RB2. He's not the most reliable player. He's missed a lot of time in his career. Jalen Wright looks like the RB3 in his own offense, and I've got him as the RB3. Kamani Vidal is this big upside swing I'm making everywhere I can, but a little bit of concern there. And then Damian Pierce and Braylon Allen are just late round picks. And Guerendo becomes this bring back on the Detroit stack. So we're going to take Guerendo to close out this Chihuahua. It's going to be a 2-7-7-2. We're going to really bet on those top receivers. I think that makes sense. What else do we have for some questions here? Looking for this quick question. If I have a 2K bankroll, I can invest in best ball. Would you focus on BBM or just stay in the lower stakes ones like Puppy, Chihuahua, Pom? That's a good question, man. And the unfortunate thing is for me, I don't think I can pretend like I would be the right person to answer that question because I only did about 100 drafts last year. I didn't invest this much. I'm going to get to this type of an investment this year for the first time. I think it's fun to draft a lot of teams. And in the early off season, I'm doing a lot of the lower stuff, price point stuff because we're so far away, because of the risk of dead roster spots and all that stuff. I think, I would do some of the lower stake stuff that I find fun because we're doing this for fun, right? The Superflex stuff, I would do it, in terms of like the best way to invest, I'm not the right person to answer that question really, because I don't have years of research on that. And you guys know that when I don't have an answer to a question, I'm just going to tell you, like, I can speculate, but I would go ask Pete Overzet or I'd go ask Pat Corain. Those guys are going to have sharp answers for you. I would just be making something up in terms of like what the best ROI decision is for how you can invest this. For me, I would do a good amount of BBM because it's the flagship contest and it's super fun. But I'd also probably want to like stretch my money a little bit. Like 1K of it, maybe I would devote to BBM, and then the other K I would probably stretch to the things that I want to stretch to. One of the reasons I really wanted to get in the Greyhound, and I do think is notable and important, is also for this drafting window, is that the Greyhound closed right away. And so everyone who drafted the Greyhound had to draft with late May and early June knowledge. The BBM, these teams that I'm drafting now are going to go up against teams that are drafting in August, fast drafts that I'm not going to be able to draft. And I'm going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball with my May and June teams. Now, I'm going to have the potential to have some really big CLV on some plays if I hit that correctly. So I'm okay with it. I'm taking those shots. But the other reason I really wanted to get into a bunch of puppy super flexes is I think I have a little bit of an edge in the structural decisions that you have to make, and it's going to close. And so a lot of the tough decisions that have to be made are all going to have to be made by everyone in the field in this same drafting window. And I think that's like a really relevant thing in terms of ROI and those things. If you think you have a little bit of an edge, to not have to face teams that are drafting with more information later in the summer. And so that's another part of it where it's not just about the contest structure and the payouts and all of those things. I do like getting into these ones that are going to close when I'm drafting. So it's kind of like my other question is, how do you want to invest your 2K bankroll? Do you want to be drafting all summer? Because if you do, I do think you should set some aside for the contests that are going to close in the summer and get into them before they close and draft with everyone in the contest having the same information at that time. If you want to do it the most optimally, the answer is probably, yeah, you can do some at this time, but it's probably to save as much as you can. I think most of the good max enterers that are really trying to do it for an ROI sense are trying to save as many of their BBM bullets as they can right now, and then they just hammer in August. Like they just draft all the time. That's my perception. But again, I don't have the luxury either of even doing that kind of a strategy because I can't fast draft in August. I get too busy with my newsletter and my Substack. I didn't even get to do as many slow drafts as I wanted last August because I was having a hard time finding the ability to get out of state, make the long drive and all that stuff in like early August. So, I mean, I think I'll have to plan that out somehow this year. But anyway, I do think there's some flexibility to this question in terms of like whether you just want to do it for enjoyment for a little bit of a degree. In terms of like trying to like get the highest ROI or find the best contests, it's not something, like I said, that I'm going to be the most reliable source on. What's up, Benjamin? We got Chicago Spartan here. Got a spot in a slow draft with me Tuesday. Happy to hear that. I mentioned last week that I'd be entering on Tuesday. And so glad to hear that you jumped in, and we'll see your name on stream, I'm sure, here at some point. Appreciate you, Sam, GM, to you and the whole Signals community. Also tuning in from work. There we go. Drafting teams while playing 18 sounds like a vibe. I didn't draft while playing, I should clarify. I drafted like in the dark, in the early morning. I was waking up at like 2:30. It's not great, but kind of a bad habit of mine. I'm a deep sleeper, but if I get woken up, then I have a hard time getting back to sleep. And our takeoff time was like 5 a.m. to go get to these early tea times. And so when I was getting up at like 2, 3, I was the one making the pot of coffee in the morning. And then I was like, I'll draft a team 3 a.m. West Coast time. There'll be 6 a.m. East Coasters ready to draft with me. So Chris Diaz, hey Chad, I'm just starting my career, but I usually watch from work. Does this continue forever? I mean, does the stream continue forever? Because yeah, it does. If you have the right career, Chris says historical anomalies. That's great. I guess they're answering the question a little bit better. Work from home unlocks max sicko stream behavior, and Tyler is #blessed. So BP says Superflex filled like crazy day one just because the ADPs were totally off. It slowed down a lot. I still think that's going to struggle, or I'm going to struggle to get back in that because I'm probably not going to make another trip for at least several weeks. I have another potential trip to Montana, but this is one of those annoying things. Washington, Idaho, and Montana all don't have Underdog. So even like I can't even enter on my drive as I go through Idaho. I can't enter in Montana. It's like that's a family trip. Like, what am I going to do? Not go on the family trip because it's not going to a location where I can enter Underdog drafts? I mean, yes, the answer to that is yes. But the the reality is I got to still do, things this summer that are right for my family and stuff like that. So anyway, there's going to be little lulls. I've talked about this on the stream. I'm not going to be doing slows forever. There's going to be lulls at times where I'm not in slows. I'll probably have guests on at times, so we'll do some fasts on their accounts. We'll maybe do some other types of content, but yeah, we're just going to kind of let this thing go and see how it goes. But I do think I'll miss the Superflex. Chris loves getting paid to watch ship chasing. I mean, that's the life, man. Finishing up slow drafts after the contest closes is so plus EV. Fair point. The Greyhound was fast only, so that was the single entry where everybody is done with that. But yeah, it is kind of nice to get the late round picks weeks later after the contest is closed. But I might not actually have that great of an edge with the puppy, the Superflex puppy. GM, do you guys coming in a little later? I always do this. I try to hit on all of you guys' comments. I want to sit here and read everything that you guys have to say. I love sitting here and chatting with you guys. But I'm only at the comments from like 9:15 my time. It's 9:40 my time now. There's some good ones here. Two elite tight ends. Are you just playing for them to ping pong spike weeks in the playoffs? Otherwise, if one guy is the guy you need, aren't you going to face teams with him plus an elite player at running back, wide receiver you don't have? This is an interesting question. I think it's a little bit too specific in its scope because the answer is no. You're not going to just face teams with him plus an elite player at running back, wide receiver you don't have. Or if you do, face a team that has the elite player from round 6, the elite wide receiver or whatever, and that's your tight end too. That team is also going to have holes. Like the teams that won BBM last year had holes, right? The team that won even the regular season had holes. Like these teams picked bad picks in single-digit rounds. I think we think too much that all 18 picks have to be perfect, that these contests are so big that you have to just draft so optimally that there's no room for, something like this concept of two elite tight ends because one has to be right and the other one's not right. It's just not the way it works. It's not the way it works in an 18 round full season draft. That's more of a DFS mindset. It's smaller lineups in DFS, and the whole parameters for the week that you're playing. We don't know the whole parameters for the season, injuries, everything else. We don't know. The teams that win are going to be strong. They're going to have stayed healthy. They're going to have a lot of really good players, but they are going to have like players on the roster. You're like, that guy was on the winning team. Pat famously loves to joke that Robert Woods was on the winning, one of the winning puppy teams or whatever. And it's like, Robert Woods was the worst pick he could have made last year, but he made it to the final, right? Like he maybe wasn't the worst pick. That was maybe harsh, but he had a really rough year. He did run a lot of routes, but it was just like really bad. That kind of thing happened. That's a late round pick. But I remember the guy, I always keep talking about the regular season champ because I guess that's the team that I was looking at more, maybe because it was finalized a little earlier. I don't think internalized the BBM champs lineup as much. I was in New Orleans for my college football playoff, my Huskies in the semifinals. And I was also in the top 30 of the FFPC main event twice and the top 10 of the NFFC primetime. So I was tracking my high stakes portfolio. I didn't have a BBM finals team. So anyway, I didn't actually I don't even know if I remember what the BBM winners lineup looks like. I didn't actually really internalize that, but I remember the regular season team was a 0 RB build that had some, like the first couple running backs they drafted weren't even the good running backs. I just mentioned a bit ago, Raheem Mostert, Kyron Williams were the two big hits for that 0 RB build. They had like AJ Dillon, I think, on the team. Like AJ Dillon was a bad pick, an objectively bad pick. He was like a 9th round pick, 10th round pick. And that was a team that won the regular season total points, right? Because they hit on the structure of zero RB, hit on the other elements of it. And so again, this is a thing, like this is a question that in theory, it can be a problem. In practice, if you're right with both tight ends, if they're both good, it frees up a roster spot because you should only be doing a 2 tight end build. The ping pong spike weeks in the playoffs is another out. There's a lot of outs is the way that I would argue it, right? I'm not just playing for them to ping pong spike weeks in the playoffs, but that is a possibility. If one guy's the guy I need, then the other guy hopefully helped me get there, or at least factors into my flex discussion one of the weeks in the postseason, right? Like there's something there from the other tight end. If the other tight end's just wrong, then yeah, I'm going to be wrong. What the 2 elite tight ends wasn't the right strategy at that point. If one of the picks is just a bad pick, but if they're both good picks, there's a lot of outs that it can help you. It can help you in advance rate by helping at the flex position in a major way that might help you bring in a lower owned running back or wide receiver that not enough people advanced because they were a drag throughout the regular season and then has a spike week in the playoffs, right? Like there's so many variations of things that this could provide you. You got to be a little bit more galaxy brained, right? To think through. And that doesn't mean that every strategy is is good or is possible or what have you. But in terms of trying to define why I like 2 elite tight ends, there's all the other reasons that I've talked about, and it's not something as specific as trying to ping pong the spike weeks or, if I'm worried about facing teams that have the better of the 2 tight ends plus an elite other player. I don't think it's that high floor, low ceiling of a strategy. I don't think it causes that type of an issue. So that would be my thoughts there. Man, you guys have so many good questions that we're already, 40 minutes in. I've made one pick, and I always want to just like sit here and chat with you guys. How do I feel about elite QB in Marathon? I mean, I think quarterback points are pretty replaceable, right? Like if you get a late round 3 QB build in best ball, I think elite QB is great in or would be better for a Marathon type format if it was not best ball. If it was you had to set your lineup all year, because they do bring a weekly advantage. Like in DFS stuff, we know that there's weekly, upside projections are really high. But if you draft 3 pretty good late round quarterbacks, you're going to get some spike weeks, and it's not fully replaceable. But quarterback is a position with a high enough floor as well that if those 3 quarterbacks all stay healthy, is a key part of it, and play all the games, you're going to get a decently high floor at QB points every week and some spike weeks if you can get them. You can basically replicate it. There's some QBs like the Daniel Jones thing where we're worried about the injury guarantees. Like if you get him as part of a late round build and he plays 15 games or even, 14 games in the Marathon and gives you a handful of spike weeks, like pretty strong weeks, because he has some rushing ability, and, Malik Neighbors is a hit, and you have them stacked up, and you made this directional bet on the Giants, and the Giants are better than expected. Suddenly you're going to be able to not fully match elite QB production, but get kind of close through the Daniel Jones profile plus the other 2 late round QBs, whatever, Derek Carr and Bo Nix. Like I'd be fine with that as a build. Is that going to match Josh Allen? No, but it's going to be closer than it kind of should be. So I don't actually foresee myself doing a lot of elite QB in Marathon. I think, I talked about taking a Bijan. I might take a swing at an elite running back in the early rounds. I still want my elite receiver depth, and I still want to be swinging at elite tight ends. I hadn't really thought through this a ton, but as I sit here and talk about it, I think elite QB would be one of my biggest, my lowest priorities. I think it can add something, but I think I can replicate it for full season points. I can replicate it easiest. I can get closest to replicating it at the lowest cost in the very late rounds on picks that are otherwise going to be, if I take an elite QB, are otherwise going to be scratch off ticket running backs and receivers. It's kind of nice that my 18th round pick could be somebody that actually provides something to it, like a 3 QB build, if that's a Bo Nix or a whatever. So yeah, I think I actually hate elite QB in Marathon. Thanks for asking that question. It's a good question. Paul says, as someone who has to travel to enter UD drafts, contests that fill slowly are better because it naturally spaces out your entries, even though you entered them all at once, i.e., You could enter 50 sprints and it would be a slow drip over the next 1 to 2 months. Oh, this is like that. Wow. I'm having a moment right now, guys. This is great because when I got back off my flight, I entered all these drafts like from the airport. I waited till the last minute because I was doing some fasts and I was seeing family and all that. When I got back, the only things that hadn't all the BBMs filled and all the puppies filled, all 20 of them. But I had some eliminators that weren't filled. And then my marathons, I only entered 5 marathons, but nobody was entering slow marathons apparently on Tuesday. And my marathons were just sitting there waiting to fill. What Paul's saying is you can enter them all, but they take so long to fill slows that it could literally take a month for you to start a draft that you entered a month ago because you're in the next 10 or 50, he's saying, sprints. 50 slows from now isn't going to fill for at least a month. So you just get like a new draft starting every few days. I usually don't have a lot of dead air because I just like to talk, but you've left me speechless. Could have told me that this is that wedding singer line, like things that would have been better if you told me yesterday. I wish I would have known this. It's a great point. Wow. This is why I can't just fast forward through all the comments. You guys, I love freaking hearing what you guys have to say. You're all here to listen to me, but I like reading what all you guys have to say. It's fantastic. That is. All right, let's make a pick. I can't. You guys are blowing my mind in the comments. I can't keep doing the comments. I have Deshaun Watson starred. He's right at ADP. We're at pick 163. He is in my queue. Let's see what this build is. It's a 1-4-6-2. This is a BBM. That is only in the 14th round. This is one of my slowest moving drafts from the first batch. It's a 1-4-6-2. It has Jared Goff. It has Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, a little Taylor Swift action. Always a nice little nod to the Swifties. Chase Brown and Marshawn Lloyd. Again, I have 2 young girls, so Taylor Swift can do no wrong in my household. We got Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stephon Diggs. Man, another ARSB Diggs pairing that we just had on the last one as well. And Xavier Worthy. Lad McConkey, Christian Watson, Jermaine Burton. Is not a pick that I make a ton, but I'm obviously worried about wide receiver depth in this build because he doesn't even really correlate. I have Chase Brown, but I don't have any Miami pieces. Now, I do have a little bit of a Cleveland thing, I guess. I have Njoku with Trey McBride. And Cincy Cleveland's the week 16 matchup. I'm not entirely sure if I was thinking through it that way. Deshaun Watson is the highest available quarterback. I don't want to talk about him that much. We talked about him a little bit on Stealing Bananas yesterday. I'm like legitimately sad that he's like such a good pick that I have to take him so much. Like purely because I mean, it's just like it's so much more enjoyable to see him struggle, frankly, because he's probably not a very good human being. The last 2 years, he's only played 12 games total. So we're all really confident that he sucks, but he only played 6 games in each season. And he was banged up through some of that and obviously had huge life changes in terms of, I talked about it a little bit on an earlier stream about it's a little bit like when, not to compare what he did to Tiger Woods, but when Tiger Woods came back and suddenly all the people on the golf course, rather than cheering him, were booing him. And it seemed to really affect his play because confidence and that kind of stuff actually matters. We're human beings. Prior to him coming back, his last season in Houston, they went 4-12, but he led the NFL in passing yards, which for a mobile quarterback is a massive thing. Like to just go back and restate like how good this guy was as a passer. At one time, he led the NFL in passing yardage in a year where he ran for 444 rushing yards. And I don't think he still has that in his bag. That was when he was 25. He's 29 now. I don't know that he's, gonna be that, or he's turning 29 in September. But when you talk about a guy who his first 3 years of his career ran for 400 plus yards and can add that type of passing ability, that's the profile for fantasy football. He had the highest yards per attempt in the league, highest yards per completion, mobility, and vertical passing. We talk about it all the time for upside at QB. I know Corain's been talking about it with like Drake May, for example, that he has a little bit more mobility and a little bit more of an aggressive mindset than people realize. By the way, I'm a little worried about Drake May. They already announced that Jacoby Brissett's the starter. That's not necessarily going to keep, but they keep also saying stuff like Drake May is the second youngest, like all the writers from New England. He's the second youngest quarterback in the league. He needs time. He has a low floor. He's a developmental player, and we don't have the infrastructure around him for him to step right in and be a superstar right away. And so all of that stuff is like, are they going to just try to justify not playing him for the whole year? Because that would be a pretty big issue. Paul, everyone stopped commenting so Gretch can draft. And it turned out, this is Paul just recently, it turned out to be your fault on a comment that you posted 20 minutes ago that I never got into a draft again. Artillery says, I think Marathon's very different, but it's not new. Obviously, Drafters does the same stuff. I'm curious about that. You don't need to do any of the correlating of the matchups. I think when you're stacking, you want to stack. I think it makes sense to stack bets on offenses. Like I was saying, like some of the offensive stuff that just defines the season is like a whole offense being good. If you were on the Texans last year and you had Artillery Frost mentions it's definitely the Texans for last year, right? Yes. If you had Stroud, but you also had thrown Nico and Tank Dell on that roster, you were in a great effing spot, right? Like that was really, really strong. Maybe you added Devin Singletary late because you were like, I always like to do the backup running backs when I do the passing stuff because I'm like, the thesis about Dameon Pierce isn't right on this team. The thesis about CJ Stroud is right. And then maybe that correlates with maybe Dameon Pierce got hurt. In this case, it was Dameon Pierce just wasn't a very good runner. He gets benched. Devin Singletary becomes a good late round running back. You could have been directionally accurate on like 4 or 5 key picks from that same offense that would have helped. Like Devin Singletary would have certainly helped a full season points bet for like a zero running back type buildish if you had done a big Houston thing. So yeah, that's another big smart thing to consider for the marathon drafts. Ralph, what's up, buddy? Here we are again. Ralph was a Signals Gold member last year. We did a lot of streams. Good to see you, man. We're gonna get into redraft stuff soon enough. It's coming. I'm like feeling way behind because I started doing all these streams rather than my projections, but I literally have a tab open with my projections spreadsheet right now. Those got to come. It's the redraft stuff's coming too, for sure. We got more GMs. Man, I'm brutal. I'm brutal with the comments. Good to see all of you guys. Andrew says, Liam went on JJ's Best Ball Pod and positive that unique combos up top would matter more for the marathon, and it makes sense to you. Meaning, it's really only a thing that happens in the first few rounds of drafts, because once you get a little bit further, there's enough space between how far guys can fall or how high they can get drafted that the different areas of a draft that players can get picked in can naturally create some unique combos. But at the very top, the guys that go with the 1-2 turn never get paired with the guys that go with the 2-3 turn. And appreciate this, Meatwad. Gretch reading chat's part of the experience. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the middle of a thought, and I had to bring that up. That's right. GM, let Gretch cook. So what Backens is saying is what Liam was saying is that up top in the early rounds, going and getting a 2-3 turn player to pair with Garrett Wilson, who you drafted at the 1-2 turn, or Drake London or whoever, just always seems to go right at 112 and 201 and never falls and never goes any higher, and will never be paired with I don't know, Nico Collins. But Nico Collins might rise. See, the problem is, like, in these formats that are open for a while, like, the second round is so flat that I'm not even confident that, like, Chris Olave already went from the big board. He was an early third round pick to where he goes at the 1-2 turn. In drafts, I've seen him go 112 and 201. I've seen Devontae Adams go 112 and 201. So in terms of like the unique, like your combo doesn't have to be completely unique, but the idea is that if you have uniqueness and there's not a lot of other variations of that, and you have, Jahmyr Gibbs winds up being the overall RB1, and insert 2-3 turn wide receiver here ends up being the overall wide receiver 1, and you're the only one who has both of them, then yeah, that's going to be big. I'm trying to figure out why that would matter more for the marathon. I think the unique combos take can also be made in terms of what if those are the two biggest guys you need in the playoffs? What if they have the biggest spike weeks and you're the only one who got them through? I guess I kind of get it. Because they get you through with the different spike weeks, but other people are getting through too, and it just resets every week. The point of the total points thing is like, if you have this unique combo, no one else has it, you're accumulating the points across all of the, yeah. So Dom's saying, what's up, Dom? Dom's saying no pod luck variability. That's what Andrew's saying. You just need the highest scoring players. Yeah. Okay. I'm getting there. It's taking me a second. I need to drink a little more coffee. Although, I mean, like, what if it was specifically week 17? Although then there's pod luck variance. You don't maybe even get those two players to week 17. Yeah, it makes sense. I agree with this take. I think, yeah, Artillery Frost says this well too, because all of your teams are competing against everyone always, so you're guaranteed to get them through, in quotes. Yes, you're getting them through. They are part of the contest. Everything they do is working in that direction. That makes sense. I like that take. That's a good take for the marathon. I don't think you have to do unique combos. I mean, it's a good take. It's a good thought. I also think there's a question of whether giving up that much ADP value is right in a lot of spots. This year, I think you can make the case that the second round is so flat that after, Drake London goes, Jahmyr Gibbs goes, and you're in the early second round, and like even if Marvin Harrison is there, especially in the marathon format, because rookies do tend to be back-weighted production. That's why his ADP is so high. I've talked about not loving his ADP. I think especially in the marathon, you can't really like Marvin Harrison's ADP that high. It's really hard for a rookie to be a total point star that justifies where he's going. So if he's the best player on the board and there's not a lot of other options on the board, Artillery Frost, it's like how Corain woke up in the BBM finals with Eckler and no Jefferson. He won in part because Eckler was so low owned. Another way to think through that. But yeah, I think this year you can make that case pretty strongly that there's reason to try it, because in the early second, when Marvin Harrison is sort of the best option, Devontae Adams, some of those guys, Chris Olave, there's not a massive difference down to, Jalen Waddle. If you want to pull Jalen Waddle up to 203 to get a unique combo of Waddle with whoever, Bijan, you got Bijan at 110, and then Bijan is the star, and Waddle, Tyreek gets hurt, and Waddle's the wide receiver 1 overall. Yep. My mind's blown for the second time in the last few minutes. All right. I got a bunch of the puppy but Superflex to get to. Let's save those because they're all early picks, and I'll probably end up talking about them a lot. This is a BBM that is just started. It's one of my newer ones. Let's go to the draft. Let's jump into the grid, see how it went. I was at the 111. I took Garrett Wilson. Gibbs and London went at the turn. Everything was very chalky. Marvin Harrison was the ADP pick. I decided I wanted to get a share of him. I don't want to be completely out on Marvin Harrison by any means. If his ADP wasn't where it was, I would not have taken him there. I will say that. If he starts to slide, I am not going to be taking him ahead of guys with higher ADPs. I want some exposure to him because I think he's a really good prospect in a pretty good spot, and that back-weighted production stuff is relevant, and I don't want my portfolio to be completely out on Marvin Harrison. I will almost certainly be underweight on him by the end of best ball season. I don't agree with I think we're doing too much in the best ball community. What if he's the guy you need to justify any ADP? It's too much about the 1 week upside or the late season stuff. Like, we don't really predict 1 week upside particularly well. Like, what's the problem with Davante Adams not having 1 week upside? And he had 175 targets last year and should have more stability at quarterback this year, whether that's Aiden O'Connell, who, by the way, was good down the stretch and was part of the reason that Davante Adams did have a massive game in the week 15 to 17 range. What did Adams have? Week 17, 13 catches on 21 targets, 126 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Absolutely fucking monster game with Aiden O'Connell at QB under the current head coach after the changes to the offense. Now they've added Gardner Minshew to stabilize things in case Aiden O'Connell's not the right answer. Maybe Minshew will be the right answer. Minshew is a big reason why Michael Pittman's going in the 3rd round this year. So, I mean, Davante Adams, 175 targets last year, but isn't back-weighted production like Marvin Harrison. Anyway, I took Marvin Harrison over Davante Adams. You just don't know. We just don't know. I think we overdo that in terms of, like, obviously that's a little bit of a meme, but in terms of trying to be right on our decisions and make the right decisions, I'm going to be underweight on Marvin Harrison at this price. There's a full season element to consider still. But Garrett Wilson at 111, Marvin Harrison, it's one of my maybe 3rd shares of Harrison, one of my relatively few shares of Harrison so far. We get Achane at 16 in this draft, Waddle at 17. Is this the draft that one of the guys in chat mentioned this a little bit ago? Or not in chat, it was either in chat or in a message that I got like on Twitter this morning. That somebody, I think it was on Twitter, somebody mentioned a draft where Achane and Waddle went very high, and then Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs were at the 2-3 turn together. It was on Twitter. I'm now remembering. I'm a little tired still, but a little tired for my trip. But doesn't seem like that really opened up any clear value for me to exploit at 35. DJ Moore winds up falling to 34. We have Zay Flowers coming off the board. This is a little bit of a fast and loose room. Malik Neighbors went. So the top of the queue is Michael Pittman, that guy that I just derogatorily suggested doesn't belong in the 3rd round. I started Wilson Harrison. When I take Harrison there, I'm definitely thinking that Cooper Kupp, isn't it? One of the only other reasons I've taken Harrison is to pair him with Puka. You get that week 17 thing, and I like taking both Puka and Kupp at cost. Puka I think is a little overrated, I've talked about, but I will take some Puka. I like Kupp at cost. I don't necessarily like them together. I've talked about a little bit, I think. I don't see any other play here. I think it's pretty clearly Kupp. Add him to Harrison. Start with a 3-receiver start. We'll think about tight end on the way back in the early 4th. That's always a pocket to hit. I don't think this guy's going to hit both Kelsey and McBride. If he hits Kelsey, I might just go McBride there. T. Higgins would be a consideration on the way back. I don't want to get into Pickens this early. I've talked about not liking his price. At a certain point, I actually took my first share of Pittman the other day. It was even later. It was like 41 in the 4th round. He fell like 10 picks past ADP. And I was like, all right, fine. I'll take a Pittman team. ETN is probably in play there, but an elite QB, I think it's this on the way back here at 402. I'm going to star him. We'll probably get back to this draft. All right, what do I have? A bunch of puppies. I have one Eliminator and one Marathon. Let's go to the Eliminator. I took Puka in this one, and I do really like Puka in this format for 2 reasons. One, he does feel stable week to week. It's a very concentrated passing game. I'm concerned that what he did last year, I think a lot of people want him to build off of that as if he's going to, a rookie receiver is going to build off that. And I've talked about how like guys like Anquan Bolden, their rookie seasons sometimes are one of their peak seasons because everything kind of comes together. And I think that's what happened with Puka last year in some regards. Everything did really come together. He stayed pretty healthy. Kupp was pretty banged up, but was also out there enough to kind of draw attention. And I mean, I think Puka's very, very good, but I just don't think you can look at his rookie season and be like, it's one of the best rookie seasons ever. Can you imagine what he's going to do in year 2? And so that's part of why I'm a little concerned about him, like in a total point sense or what have you. But I think the consistency is going to be there. I think he's going to be productive. Absolutely. And so for Eliminator, he's a great pick in that regard. And then he's also a week 6 buy. I think you really want to get into those early buys in your build whenever you can, because week 12 and week 14 really start to add up. That's where the 2 6-team buys are. And we know it's easier to advance out of the pods early in the year. So if you have your good players on buy early, that makes a lot of sense. I'm back up in the second round. I don't know that Marvin Harrison's the right answer for an Eliminator. Drake London is staring me in the face. The week 12 buy is a little bit of a headache, but he's very similar to Puka in the regard of, I think there's going to be plenty of passing volume. I think he's going to be able to consolidate targets. I like London in this Eliminator format as well. So we have a nice little target-heavy start to that Eliminator build. The Marathon is another draft I'm going to jump in really quick. We are in the 3rd round here. Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams. So I took Adams mid-second. Jalen Waddle already off the board. Drake London almost fell back to me, but did not. Chris Olave off the board. Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. I think you could have went Devon Achane there. I think you could have went certainly like a Diggs or a Nico. I did do some Nico. I think Nico is probably the pick there, but this is more of a diversification pick. I do like Devonta Adams in this range. Brandon Ayuk was the ADP pick. I let him pass. I've talked about the concerns I have with just overall target volume in San Francisco. I don't think either of Debo or Ayuk gets traded, and I do think they're a little bit overpriced. I am playing both of those guys in the Eliminator. So I took, I mentioned I started 10 more Eliminators. I took Ayuk in the second round of 2 of them. I took Debo in the second round of 2 others. I talked about this in my big write-up, but the week 9 buy for those guys, super, super helpful. They share it with only the Steelers, which I'm not drafting a lot of Steelers as it is. And so you start this build with an important player early on that, I mean, with Ayuk, I am a little concerned about the consistency of the target volume, like I've been talking about, but he's an important player early on that's not going to match buys. It's not a late buy, and it's not going to match buys with a lot of other players that I have. And I do think that stuff outweighs my perception of his target ability. With Debo, it's also a tough click because you're like, man, this guy's always banged up, and this is the Eliminator. But again, I'm thinking through this idea of I could be wrong about Debo's health. I could be wrong about Ayuk's target ceiling. What I'm not going to be wrong about is the fact that they have a week 9 bye, and the only team they share it with is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so I actually think, even though their profile maybe isn't perfect for the Eliminator, I am going to be wide receiver heavy, and Ayuk's going to have spike weeks, and that's going to help provide a floor. And the weeks where he has floor games, I've talked about this. If you go look at Ayuk's game log, too many games with like 3 catches for a round 2 wide receiver when it's the same situation this year. Like you would expect similar distribution of targets and all that stuff. Because he was great last year. He was very, very efficient. He had a breakout elite season, but there's just a lot of games where it's, but in best ball that can play if you have other guys to cover the lower scoring weeks. And I do need to draft those teams as wide receiver heavy. Anyway, San Francisco players in the second round, I realize, are guys that I do really like in the Eliminator format because of that buy element. Andrew, is it GTO to pair elite players with late buys together with rookies with earlier buys so they spike post buy when your top assets are on buy? That's a great thought. I hadn't thought through that, but I mean, we do see the rookie bump post buy, and it tends to not really matter where the buy is. If you're talking about rookies getting a post buy bump, I mean, I don't think some of it is just that we see late week or late season production from rookies. They start to build into the offense more. They start to get used more, all of those things that are very natural. And so the trend that they're better after their bye is partly just because the buys tend to be towards the middle of the season. So this idea that, like, this rough idea that Andrew kind of touches on, that I don't know if you specifically mean this, but this idea that if a rookie had an earlier buy, that they might like have that post-buy spike earlier in the season than a rookie with a later buy. I don't know if I necessarily buy that like the buy element is such a big signal. Obviously, it could be because you have an extra week of practice and you maybe reset and decide we're going to integrate our rookie more. But this idea of getting rookies just simply paired with elite players that have later buys, I think it makes sense. Or back-weighted production paired with later buys, I think is something to think through. It's something I've thought through with handcuff running backs as well. I'll point out, if you do like a 0 RB build and you have some later buys with your like more stable, higher end parts of your 0 RB buy, where those are my touch guys for the early season, they have late buys. And then I'm like willing to just take a guy that's like a total 0 for the first half of the year, but he's a handcuff, and be like, well, maybe he is starting by the later part of the year because of an unfortunate injury or something like that. I did this with Keaton Mitchell recently, who himself has a week 14 bye, but it was a really late pick because the Keaton Mitchell play to me is that, he's probably not going to be ready week 1, but that he's ready by like week 8. And he's also just a handcuff play on Derrick Henry anyway. And so if Derrick Henry's banged up by week 8 or something, or if he's banged up even before Keaton Mitchell's back, but then when Keaton Mitchell's back, he's their best option. That's sort of the idea, right? Is like eventually Derrick Henry might miss some time and open up an available starting running back spot that Keaton Mitchell, like he wouldn't matter week 1 anyway. But I wouldn't want to do that if I needed a usable week from Keaton Mitchell early in the year. This is just on any type of build. But it's particularly notable for the Eliminator. Early buy not as important as the rookies bye week. Is not overlapping with your elite players' late buy. Yeah. Definitely don't want to overlap buys too much. Meatwad said he's trying to get himself off Ayuk with the target ceiling stuff, but in the end, it's just hard not to bet on the talent in that offense. Could really break out, but could just be a repeat of last year. Yeah, it's tough when he was a 3+ yards per hour run guy last year with a massive yards per target, so much efficiency after the target to envision that he breaks out even more. And if you're saying like could just be a repeat of last year as like that's a miss at his price, because last year was a really good year. Like guys can't do like they can be really great and not do that every year. I don't know if this is overthinking, but the Niners players are very better in best ball because they get game scripted, meaning they have consistent spike weeks instead of randomly spiking. This I agree with. I'm talking about full season usage concerns, but they're good players. And when they are involved and they get that 1 week of volume, they're going to be efficient. Like I'm saying Ayuk was so efficient that it's hard to imagine he can repeat that or get even better. But I do think he's going to be efficient. This is a great point. They're very much better in best ball. These crowded situations are still worth targeting in best ball. It's just hard in the Eliminator where you want that weekly floor of volume too. Like I need other guys around that. But ceiling is floor. I've talked through that in my write-up as well, where like in best ball, like if you have enough Brandon Ayuks, you're going to like, yeah, maybe you get unlucky in 1 week, everyone's bad, but there's a lot of ways we can get unlucky, right? You're more than likely going to have a spike week every week. That's going to be like 30 points, and it's going to cover not having that one guy that got you at least like a 10-point usable week. Like the difference between 5 points and 10 points at your wide receiver 3 spot or your flex or whatever, that's a little 5-point difference. The thing that really determines whether teams are actually good in fantasy football is the number of 30-point weeks you have in your lineup. Is the ability to actually have ceiling. It's that upside like matters so much. But again, when I'm talking about like the Drake London play that I made on that last draft, I'm talking about target floor weekly. I was excited about having Puka and London. Those two guys to me are target floor stability, weekly stability guys that also provide that same ceiling. I do think they have plenty of potential. That's what I was just talking about with the Devonta Adams thing too. 21 target game, 13, catches over 100 and something yards and 2 touchdowns. That's what Brandon Ayuk does in his spike games. But it also comes with more stability in the down games as well. That's the way that I don't want to sacrifice upside to seek floor. But if I think the player also has a ton of upside, which I think Drake London and Puka Nacua do on a weekly basis, but also provide me floor, then that's, why I wind up being more excited about that profile in Eliminator. It's not purely for floor. You still need the upside element. Man, great chat today. This is a fun. I don't even know if we need to make slow drafts anymore. We'll just come and hang out and chat. You guys are bringing the heat. The hope for Ayuk wouldn't be to improve on efficiency, but to potentially get some more volume. If he repeats last year, it's not a bad thing. That ceiling upside only really hits if the volume does. Great point. And there's obvious contingent volume. If Kittle misses time, if Debo misses time, if Christian McCaffrey misses time, they will have to rely on their other three big players more, which could allow Brandon Ayuk to be more of the game plan some weeks. Ben makes a good point here, too, as well. Nico has a similar profile to Ayuk and just as good of an offense. Waddle, it's not too difficult for me to mix it up. Waddle does not have a similar profile, in my opinion. If you go really dig into the numbers, Waddle, we looked at this with the targets per out run stuff recently, was a top 10 player in volume, even with Tyreek there, because they funnel all the volume to like 2 players or 3 players. It's not 4. He's top 10, not for number 2s, for all players. He's ahead of most teams number 1 in terms of concentration of volume per route. He does get banged up a little bit, so the per route stuff is maybe a little bit tricky, but he's different. Nico's a fair point in that there's a lot of weapons in that passing game too. I also think that doesn't go 4 deep. I don't think Dalton Schultz is a good enough player to say he's a target earner. I think he gets what's left over. And I also question whether Tank Dell is yet, but that's one that people are not in agreement with me on. But I think Nico, Diggs, and then probably Dell, because I'm in on Dell, but not certainly Dell. Nico was a full yards per out run better than Dell last year. Nico's good. He's a target earner in an offense that also doesn't have a running back that they're going to like feature. I think Mixon's just a guy basically and how they're going to use him, but he'll be brought along by the offense. I do actually think these are different than Ayuk. Enough different that, because the other thing with Nico is they're going to throw, like the bet on Houston is they're going to throw a lot more in TJ Stroud's second year. It's going to be a pass first offense. That's not really the way that San Fran's going to run things when they have Christian McCaffrey, who they just paid a huge, massive extension to, and Kyle Shanahan's always been a run-heavy offense type of guy. Ben clarifies there that he's just overweight on all the second-round receivers for structural reasons, but not taking many stands. I think that's fair. I'm not trying to completely say you should be completely out on the San Fran guys. They clearly have the spike potential, especially in formats where the playoff stuff matters a ton. You want to have exposure to those guys. All right, what are we in? We're in a marathon. I just got sidetracked again like usual. We're in a marathon build here where I went Tyreek and then I went Adams. That's part of why I went Adams in the second round, actually, I think, on this team over Nico on this one. I mentioned Nico's kind of the pick in a vacuum, but I went Adams here, I think in part a little bit because of what we were just talking about with Nico having potentially some full season points ceiling concerns with both Diggs and Tank Dell being there. Adams to me is that player that if he hasn't gone over the age cliff can be the top 3 overall play. If the quarterback plays good enough, I think he can really dominate targets. I think Brock Bowers adds something to their passing game in a way that opens up Adams. And he's just like unguardable when he's at his peak. And he still earned volume really, really well last year. Just wasn't as efficient. Maybe he's gone over that edge. But this is the type of pick in this format where I'm like full season total points, Tyreek Hill too. These guys can be the top 2 players in total volume, right? Like weighted volume, air yards, however you want to frame that. And then be efficient on that. Those are marathon picks that I would be pretty comfortable with. DJ Moore is not a marathon pick that I would be comfortable with. DK Metcalf is not. He's got 2 other good receivers behind him. Derrick Henry justifiably could be, but I don't want to take him. Sam Laporta, I do think you want to go elite tight end in this format, but I think has some ceiling concerns, target volume stuff. Cooper Kupp, you can get some concentration, right? The Cooper Kupp thesis is, what if last year was just a banged up season and he's back to being Cooper Kupp this year? What if he's better than Nakua this year? I don't think it's impossible. I don't really want to go elite QB in this format. I don't see anything else in the queue that I love. He does match a bye with Tyreek Hill, but week 6 isn't. And I don't know. I'm just not that worried about buys in the marathon. We're going to take our second Cooper Kupp pick this morning. This is a very veteran-heavy build so far. I don't think you have to be like very veteran-heavy with boring players, older players, just because it's the marathon and it's full season or what have you. But I do think that the long-term trends at wide receiver, the reason that we take early and high-end receivers, they tell you that the guys that finish up there are the guys that we draft high. They're the good players. We know who's good at wide receiver, and they tend to finish very high. It's the same names. If you go look at the past elite names at the very top, it's year after year, it's the same guys, right? And I just drafted 3 players that have previously finished a season, I want to say no lower than wide receiver 2. Tyreek Hill was wide receiver 2 last year. And he was wide receiver 2 in 2022 as well. I don't know if he's ever finished wide receiver 1. Cooper Kupp was wide receiver 1 in 2021, of course. Devontae Adams was wide receiver 1 in 2020. So each of the last 4 seasons, one of these 3 guys was a top 2 overall wide receiver. And so that whole idea of like the guys who have done it before tend to be the guys who do it again. That's what I'm playing into with these picks. I mean, a lot of times the cliff can come, but it would surprise absolutely no one if these 3 guys are all top 5 wide receivers again this year because they've done it. we got Meatwad, that's fairing himself in the chat. Adams and Big Dog would be the easy start ever. That's fair. We got Ben saying that in the marathon or drafters format, it favors 3 QB, 3 tight end type builds so you can win the flex at running back receiver. I think that's a very good point. That was what I was kind of talking through with the elite quarterback question. I don't know if I'm fully into the 3 tight end side because I still want the elite upside at tight end. I think it's harder to replicate full season tight end production from like 3 late round tight ends. You still need the stud tight ends to be able to get real tight end points. I don't think you probably want 2 early tight ends. So maybe when he's saying 3 tight end builds here, he's thinking 1 elite and 2 very late ones, which is fine. I could agree with that. Benjamin May here says he's been intentionally avoiding any overlap of bye weeks for the first 5 picks of every draft. Good process or overthinking. I think it's a fine heuristic. I don't think you should intentionally avoid if you're like, this is the pick. The Kupp right here for me was the pick. I think it was pretty clear. I would put the other picks as at least a half tier down, like Laporta's like a half tier down, Henry. These 2 top receivers, DJ Moore and DK Metcalf, I don't see the same full season ceilings. Same with Michael Pittman. Zay Flowers, I think we're getting to another tier. I think he's a breakout candidate, but we're kind of into another tier there. He might even be a 4th round pick if he can swing back to me. I don't like the elite tight end or QB here. I think Cooper Kupp was the clear pick here, so I'm not gonna not make the pick. But as far as like a heuristic to have in your bag and be thinking about, yeah, I have no problem with being like, yeah, I don't want my best players all out the same week, especially in like a total points contest like the marathon. I don't think you really want to have a really down week. You probably do want to spread it out a little bit. Oh, I just got on the clock on another marathon. We're taking so long that we're never going to get to the puppies. I'm lying. We're going to get to them very quickly. And we're going to make those picks reasonably quickly as well. This is a marathon where I took Amon-Ra at 7 over Breece Hall. I think Amon-Ra probably speaks for himself in the marathon. You got a really strong target floor and profile. We are back up in the second round. Saquon Barkley and Brandon Ayuk at the top. It's a very similar question to the Devontae Adams decision that I made in the other draft. I don't want to have Adams in all of my marathons. I want to go find that one that I just did. There it is. Found that quick. So I took Adams after Waddle was off the board in this other one, and it was a Tyreek Hill team anyway. This is an Amon-Ra start. It really opens up Waddle as a pick in this other marathon. And Waddle is, to me, a guy who can really consolidate volume, and then especially if Tyreek were to miss time, I think Waddle's a top 3 wide receiver at that point, or top 5. The top 3 is really really good names, but top 5. Just because of the way that Mike McDaniel gets volume to his guys. And he did that. The game that Tyreek missed last year, Waddle had, I'm just going to tell you his exact line. It was like a 14 target, 9 catch game in the one game that Tyreek missed. I guess I have to look up what game Tyreek missed, although I might be able to just pick it out of his game log. Yeah, it was actually a 9 target, 8 catch, 142 yard, 1 TD game. And they only threw, Tua only threw 24 passes in that game because they won 30-0. So he had a 60-yard TD in the second quarter. He caught a bunch of other balls, and then they were up 24-0 at half over the Jets in this game. Mike White played. He's on the Dolphins now. We might all think of him on the Jets, but he was actually on the Dolphins last year as their backup. He played down the stretch in this game. He had 2 pass attempts, 2 rush attempts. They got Jeff Wilson some carries. Chase Claypool caught 2 passes in this game, which is something that may have been the only game he caught 2 passes in all of last year. He was obviously not as involved in Miami. He did that one other time last year. Braxton Berrios played. Cedric Wilson played. So they got into the backups is what I'm saying. Waddle did most of that production just in the first half. But he's a dude that can really consolidate volume, especially if Tyreek misses time. I am going to take Waddle in that marathon. Oh, look at that. We're on the clock in the BBM. I have to take another pick. This is the one that we took Cup at the top of the stream. I starred both Kelsey and McBride. I went Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison, Cup. I love taking McBride any chance I can. It probably would make some sense to build some Harrison, McBride, Kyler Murray teams. I have Cup coming back. I'm trying to think through if I really think that McBride over Kelsey is right on a team where I have Harrison. I kind of feel like Kelsey should be the pick because I'm kind of asking a lot of Harrison. I don't really love the double stack the mobile QBs or be as heavy into the passing upside of mobile QBs. But I don't know, man. Drew Petzing was pretty good as a coordinator for the Cardinals last year. It could be the case that Kyler still has some untapped passing ceiling. It's not a marathon. It's a BBM. Bennett says if it's a marathon, he wouldn't do McBride. It is not. It's a BBM. Fantasy Football Garage says it's got to be Kelsey, right? I think there's some people that would say it has to be McBride because you're building out this Arizona Rams game, and it's just so important to have that Week 17 stuff built out. But there's no guarantee I'll get Kyler. Kyler's ADP is 79. This is the one. This one is the Marv you just picked for, right? Yes. Yeah, correct. Meatwad. I have Marv. I'm curious what all your guys' thoughts are on this, where you would go. I'm going to take one of these 2 players. Let's do a little poll in the chat. I'll let you guys kind of dictate. We get a Kelsey here. Peter's in the 12 spot. He's watching the stream. He took Higgins and Pittman. Higgins was the other player I would have considered there. Pittman's a nice little ADP value there. What's up, Peter? Glad to have you. Wish you would have taken one of the tight ends, so you could have made my decision for me. That would have been nice. Meatwad's that person. He says Marvin McBride double would be sick. It does make Kyler a must if it's McBride. I agree. Kelsey gives you a Mahomes out too. I agree. Paul saying McBride. Seth saying Trey. I like the late round shots at Cardinals wide receivers. If you want to double stack Kyler later, I think that's fair. The Michael Wilson and Zay Jones plays. McBride from Hoosier. It looks like we're getting a little bit more McBride. I like tie-breaking McBride, Kelsey with correlation. I do want to look at this. Kyler's 79. I want to look at my upcoming picks. I guess I'll go to this view. So this is tricky, man. The next turn, I'm 59 and 62. I don't think I want to take him at 62. So then the next turn is 83 is when I get back up at 7-11. Does Kyler make it to 83? That's the gamble I'll be making. He is on average 79.5. It's 3.5 picks after ADP. That's probably a fine bet to make when I have both Harrison and McBride. Like, why would he have to go before that? The Puka drafter is where they could feasibly be into Puka Drafters 2 picks ahead of me, so they could take him at 709. Jay Walker here, and then backdoor some of those late Arizona receivers and make a little thing into this game. What's the rest of you guys? We have Short King Summer for Kyler. I think you kind of box out Kyler from being drafted. Most rooms will give you him at 83 unstacked. I think that's right. I think it's better than 50%. It might even be 75% likely that we would get Kyler there. He could push to 83, especially in the slow when you cornered his market. I think you guys are right on that. I've seen that. I've taken him there. Less likely for someone to take naked Kyler, a lot less to worry about when you have both. I think these are all fair points. And somebody also said the Stafford out. Fantasy Football Garage. You said it makes Kyler a must, which it was right. We're talking through that obviously now. And you said, I guess Stafford, but he's not as exciting. Absolutely not. But it would be, it's a minor backdoor thing. If Kyler doesn't make it, I can go Stafford Cup with Harrison and McBride and still be really game stacked there. I much prefer Kyler. Peter mentions I tried to be political about the Pittman pick, but I was obviously just talking smack about him. He said I didn't love clicking Pittman, but only but I only have 2%. Felt like I needed 2 wide receivers for structure. I trust Steichen, first read RPO stuff, a little past ADP. Love all that. I just took him the other day for the first time. I said a little bit further behind this. But if you're picking him because you trust Steichen. You're picking him because of the first read RPO stuff, and you should be picking him past ADP. And you have 2%, and you felt like you needed receivers. Your other option was go to Pickens. So fully support that. Great explanation. Slows this year, but pushing uncorrelated QBs aggressively. I have been seeing that. Love this. This is going to be the one that gets me to take McBride. Underdog is a gambling website. You don't come here unless you want to gamble. We're going to gamble, guys. We're going to gamble. Seth, Murray always goes 10 picks ahead or behind ADP, never at ADP. Where are the Puka and Cup drafters relative to you? I just went and looked at this. The Puka drafter is 2 spots ahead of me, so he could take Kyler ahead of me. I have Cup, so that's the other thing is I also have the Rams side of it pretty boxed out. I guess I could have looked at the Kyler or Kylan. Man, I keep messing that up. One of my cousin's son's names is Kylan, and then there's Kyler Murray, and I swear to God, I can't even figure out what the Rams running back's name is right now. It's Kyren. Good Lord. Baby Stevie says, great content, by the way. Love listening to the thought process. Glad that was enjoyable because I was feeling a little tortured. I mean, I think Kelsey's a good pick. Thought you had Kylan Hill in the brain for a minute there. No, that's my I guess my second cousin, my cousin's kid, Kylan Williams. Yeah. Did I just say I have a favorite son? I don't even have a son. I have 2 daughters. No, it was one of my cousin's sons. All right, we got a bunch of puppies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But we gotta spin the wheel. We haven't spun the wheel yet. We gotta talk a little bit about some team. I love doing these breakdowns. We've had some really fun stuff. We've hit on why you really got to get Kendre Miller in every draft when we did the Saints spin. Talked a lot about the Colts on the last stream, and that was a really big structural decision about this RPO stuff and the things that we were just talking about. I'm trying to pull up my wheel. We have removed 5 teams from the wheel. First cousin once removed. They're kind of just all nephews to me is the way I'm thinking of it. I'm Uncle Ben. All right. What team are we going to talk about today? We're also going to remember some guys, which we love to do. Washington Commanders. Man, My immediate thought on the remember guys Washington teams is I used to love playing with them on Tecmo Super Bowl. They had Ernest Biner, they had Art Monk, they had Gary Clark, they had Mark Rippon. An incredibly fun, and they had like all this like motion in their playbook. An incredibly fun team on those old Tecmo Super Bowl video games. Pour one out for Chris Thompson. I like that, Kevin Tompkins. He was the PPR cheat code. Patrick Ramsey, quarterback from Florida. Is that right? He was bad, but I do remember him. Lavernius Coles, Santana Moss, Chris Cooley. You guys remember Chris Cooley? Clint Portis got traded straight up for Champ Bailey. That would never happen in today's NFL. Sean Taylor, RIP. Trung candidate. He was drafted by the Rams, but maybe he played there. Joe Theismann. Jordan Reed, like 3 years in a row, was the PPR tight end one in points per game, but he would never play enough games. Who else? Oh, I mean, RG3's rookie season, an all-time great rookie. Oh, there you go. Ben Harvard just mentioned it. Pierre Garcon and RG3. That's right, Garcon. Alfred Morris on that team. Santana Moss in the chat. They've had some fun players. There's got to be other running backs. Yeah. Shout out to Alfred Morris, the chat. The original sort of late round breakout running back. We've had more of those. Not late fantasy round, late NFL draft, and then rookie season breakout kind of out of nowhere. It was the Alfred Morris thing. It used to be, a little bit more predictable, I think, but he was the start of like running backs don't matter. If Alfred Morris can do that. Lavernius Coles. Yeah, everybody collectively remembered Alfred Morris at the same time. Look at this great trivia. We got RG3 and Alfred Morris were one of only two combinations of QB RB to both finish in the top 5 of rushing at their respective positions. Don't tell us the other one yet. Because I want to know the other one, but I want to think about it. I'm going to guess, assume he knows the other one. It could be like Michael Vick and like Michael Turner, the former Charger, bowling ball. He would run a lot. Was he ever with Vic in one of Vic's big rushing seasons? I don't know if he was. I think he was maybe a little bit after and more with early Matt Ryan seasons. Lamar, Mark Ingram. I don't know if Ingram ever played enough. They kind of rotated. Vic and Westbrook when Vic was with the Eagles. I don't think so. I don't think Westbrook would have ran enough. He was more of a dual threat running back. Vic and Jamal Anderson. I think Jamal Anderson's too early. I think that's a Chris Chandler version of the Falcons. Liddell Betts is another good remember some guy. Oh man, Roy Halou. Roy Halou. That's why we're here. That's why we do remember some guys, to remember guys like Roy Halou. I loved that dude. Oh man, I was way too into Roy Halou. Favre, Amon Green. Oh man, now you got me thinking about going back a little further because it's only top 5 at the position. They don't have to be an all-time great rushing quarterback. I don't think Favre would have been there, but it could have been like a Steve Young with Ricky Waters or with a Roger Craig or whoever he played with. It could have been Fran Tarkington with whoever the Vikings running back was back in the day, Cap and Frank Gore is a good guess. I like that too. Big Ben and Le'Veon. Big Ben never would have been top 5 at the position in rushing. If we're just naming Washington guys, Andrew's new to the show, apparently. Chris Cooley killed me in my championship in my first year of fantasy. He had 3 TDs week 16 that year. That's right. Chris Cooley was a dude. Yeah, we are doing our Remember Some Guys segment. Got to remember some key Washington stars. Curtis Samuels? Chris Samuels. Is that a defender? They had some fun players, man. Champ Bailey early in his career on the defensive side before he got traded. Oh, Darrell Green. Yeah, Drunk Candidate was the fastest running back on Madden for a while. Do we have the answer? Hint, same division. Oh, Benjamin May does know the answer, and he just gave us a hint. It's the same division as RG3 and Alfred Morris. Is it Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders? Miles Sanders had that one big rushing game season. Dak and Zeke were saying Dak doesn't run as much as you guys probably think. Saquon and Jones in 2021. 2022. It could have been Saquon and Daniel Jones. Hurts and Swift last year? I don't think so. Elway and his MVP running back. Oh, God, it could be like Randall Cunningham on the Eagles. And was it Keith Byers? Oh, Tiger Uppercut has beat me to it. He has Randall Cunningham in the chat here as well. Even before the hint. Shout out Tiger Uppercut. Ernest Biner, I think, was with the Browns and then was with Washington. Oh, he's a remember some guy, but I don't know that he would have been with a mobile unless it's Doug Williams. Mark Rippon is the guy that was in Tecmo Super Bowl, but he was only their QB for a year. They had Doug Williams, who was the Super Bowl MVP for them in the late 80s. I think Biner was still with the Browns at that time, maybe. Cunningham and Ricky Waters. I don't know if Ricky Waters was like with the Eagles long enough or good enough at that time. He played for the Seahawks too when I was a kid. He was with the Niners. He bounced around. What's the prompt? The prompt is quarterback running back duo that both finished top 5 in rushing at their position in the same season. It's only happened twice. We know that it was an NFC East team. The one that we were given was RG3 and Alfred Morris, as we talked through Washington. Eli Manning and Brandon Jacobs. That's just funny. I'm picturing Eli Manning top 5 in quarterback rushing is funny. Oh, Cunningham, Herschel Walker, maybe. I don't know if Herschel Walker was ever a top 5 runner in Philly either, but that's James beat me to it. He had Cunningham and Ricky Waters. We must not have gotten it yet because Benjamin popped in to give us a hint. Are we close, Benjamin? Have we named either the quarterback or the running back, or have we not gotten either? Let's see if he can opine on that. Vic and Shady feels right. It could be like Roger Staubach. The prompt is just incorrect. Josh Allen did it last season. It's a quarterback and running back in this. So did Josh Allen and James Cook do it last season? Yes, we have named one. We've named at least one of the. We've named them both individually. All right, well, just tell us. Let's. We got to move on at some point. I'm amazed that we've named them both individually, but have not paired it yet. Buffalo didn't have a top 5 running back last year, James Young says. So I don't think the prompt is necessarily incorrect because of Josh Allen. He said, my bad if it was last year. That's the other thing. That's one of those things that happens with trivia. Like you heard it a couple of years ago, and then it I don't blame you on that at all. But I do just kind of want to know now if we've named both. I'm curious. Allen and Cook both 4th, Ben said, and now chat's trying to figure that out. I'm trying to pull that up as well. Was James Cook was 4th in rushing yards last year? That wouldn't surprise me, I guess. Yeah, he was 4th in the NFL in rushing yards last year. So 2023 was another year where this actually happened. Ben's right. James Cook and Josh Allen were both 4th. So there's a third pairing. Benjamin May says Cunningham was the quarterback, and we've named the running back, but not together. It's the old Eagles with Randall Cunningham It's Keith Byers, right? I just pulled up the old. You don't remember the running back? I think it's I think it must be Keith Byers. 89 and 90. Cunningham was their top. Oh, Herschel Walker in 92 was their top rusher. It could be Byers. It could be Herschel Walker. It could be Keith Jackson. No, that's a receiver. Or a tight end. What was Keith Jackson? Yeah, tight end. That's top receivers. This is a fun question. It looks like it would have to be Keith Byers. I was trying to find it, but I'm at work, so ducking and dodging the boss right now. I mean, what more could you ask for than ducking and dodging the boss and throwing out trivia questions? I mean, that's where I want my trivia questions to come from. Somebody under their table trying to look it up on their phone. That's fantastic. I'm trying to find the season so we can get some clarity here. It looks like maybe it could have been Heath Sherman, but I mean, he only had 600 yards in 1990. In 1991, Cunningham was hurt. In 1992, Herschel Walker had 1,070 yards for the Eagles. Cunningham had 549 yards. It's got to be 1992. It's got to be Cunningham and Herschel Walker. I told you guys that was wrong. Or I didn't think he did that with the Eagles. That's after. So he was Herschel Walker really good with Dallas early, traded to Minnesota for all those picks that made the Dallas dynasty. After his stint with Minnesota, he goes to the Eagles at age 30 and runs for 1,070 yards. It's actually his second highest rushing total in his NFL career, second to his final year in Dallas, final full season in Dallas. At age 30, seems like that was the answer there. All right. We got to talk about Washington for 2024. I always like to jump into the team page, kind of talk through some expectations, etc. Last year, they go 4-13. Some of these teams that we've looked at, I've said the year prior is not going to be super relevant. I believe that to be the case here for obvious reasons. They have a whole new staff. They have a new quarterback. We can talk through the receiving position a little bit. Samuel was banged up in a couple games, missed some time. Still out targets Jahan Dotson, who really struggles to earn volume last year. Terry McLaurin, the clear number one, but McLaurin has never been a massive targets per route run guy. He just tends to go where his routes go. I'm going to pull up my per route run document that I love to show you guys. We'll switch over to there to talk through the receivers real quick. So McLaurin, 19.9% targets per route run, very low for a number one wide receiver. He also wasn't particularly efficient. The yards per route run was down last year in his age 28 season. He is typically more efficient. QB play wasn't great. But this targets per route run never even hitting 22% in a season is a little bit of a concern with him, although he's always been at a high ADOT. So the weighted targets per route run stuff is better when you factor in the air yards. But the routes, I mean, look at these routes numbers. I've talked to you guys before about how 600 is like going to be near the top of the league. He's been 580 plus for 4 straight years. That's why I always talk about Terry McLaurin. For those who've listened to my work in a lot of other places, I always talk about him as a good but not great receiver. But I think he's good. And I think if Jaden Daniels has a really good rookie season, that it's got to flow through Terry McLaurin to some degree because of this concern. Jahan Dotson, 14.9% targets per route run as a rookie. but was good in yards per target, which tends to be predictive of more volume in year 2, maybe some more design plays and things. And he was at a really high ADOT on that targets per out run, and he scored a lot of touchdowns, which added to his efficiency. There's some research that shows that per target, like fantasy point efficiency leads to more volume. That research would be from Rotoviz. Blair Andrews has done great work on that. And I've talked to Sean Siegel about that a little bit, and he thinks that the touchdowns are relevant. I mean, it's an important point of all of this. And it is hard to quantify touchdowns. That's why in some of the like adjusted yards per attempt passing stuff, they turn touchdowns into like 20 extra yards, because it's a thing. Like, you score a touchdown, you could have potentially gotten more yardage on that play, but the end zone was in your way, so to speak. At any rate, we know touchdown rate can fluctuate a lot, but it's not a bad thing to be efficient with touchdowns. He was efficient with yards per target as a rookie. And those are some of the reasons that I was in on Dotson last year. Felt like the targets per out run could come up into a better range, and the efficiency was there. But he had a tough profile for a first-round wide receiver. He was a guy that I was not super into at his, relative to his draft capital being a first-round receiver. It was that rookie year and some of the positivity with the efficiency that got me into him for year 2. But this 14.9% goes down to 12.4%, even at a much lower ADOT. The weighted targets per out run completely craters. He's not efficient. His yards per out run falls under 1. And now these concerns in year 1 about the targets per out run are glaring. Now he's a 1.39 yards per out run guy who went down to 0.82. Now this looks like a bust, right? And that's why he goes outside the wide receiver window this year, going into year 3. There's not a lot of optimism. He's going to be the breakout guy. And I go back to that profile that wasn't very strong for a first-round wide receiver. And I can't use the efficiency from his rookie year to justify being in on him in 2024. He's a guy that I'm pretty out on, and I think is probably just not going to be very good in his career. I think he'll make plays at times. I think he's going to run a lot of routes this year. Curtis Samuel is gone. They've added some additional pieces, obviously, with Luke McCaffrey, who I like. I like that profile. He's got a really good college target earning profile. And tight end Ben Sinnott, or Sinnott, or however you say that. Just want to show Curtis Samuel real quick as well. He ran 402 routes because he missed some time, so his routes weren't up there. Like, Dotson ran 635, and Terry McLaurin ran 643. Samuel only at 402. Some of that was a rotational role. Some of it was he had 2 games that he left with fewer than 20% of the snaps and then missed a third game. So basically missed like 3 games of the season. He earns volume at a pretty good rate for his career. Has some other seasons in that 20 to 21% range. That's part of why I'm willing to kind of consider him as a guy who could eat up some of the available opportunity in Buffalo, because I do think there's some other seasons in his career that show some target earning, even back to his early seasons, 2017, 2018, on lower routes numbers. He was pretty decent per route run. His ADOT has fluctuated. This 2021 season doesn't really matter, only 37 routes there. But his ADOT was really high in some of these Carolina years. It's been lower in like a slot range for most of the last few seasons. It's going to be easier to earn volume at a lower ADOT, and that's why like the weighted targets per out run was really good there in 2018, but it's mostly been sub 0.5 the other seasons, which, I mean, still better than like Jahan Dotson type range, but it's like a little weaker than what Terry McLaurin has done for most of his career. But I mean, I think he can be a weighted targets per out. He can be a guy who spikes in weighted targets per out run this year a little bit if Buffalo sees him as important. And they paid him early in free agency. They waited to bring in some of the other guys like Marcus Valdes-Scantling. So anyway, I think Samuel could be one of the answers to the big Buffalo riddle. And that's why I'm willing to take some of him as well. But also, I think it's worth pointing out that like this targets per route run in this range, and he was only at 17% last year in Washington. This is probably influenced by the fact that Jahan Dotson couldn't earn. Or put differently, Jahan Dotson being at 12.4% looks worse when you consider that Curtis Samuel is basically near his career high, and Terry McLaurin has never been a big volume earner. Like, it was there for Jahan Dotson to earn more volume. And it's part of why Curtis Samuel stepped into a decent amount of volume. So I think that makes it even more concerning that Dotson was so unproductive last year. And it puts a bigger emphasis on the rookie season not being a big earning year. So like another name I'm going to pull up really quick is Treylon Burks. just to show you another example of a guy who, in his rookie season, Traylon Burks was a 20.9% targets per out run, decent 12.4 ADOT, good weighted targets per out run, pretty efficient, 1.75 yards per route run. That's a lot better than what we just saw from Jahan Dotson all the way across the board. The yards per out run in his rookie year in 2022 was 1.75 to 1.39. The yards per target was a little bit lower, but the volume was much higher. Burks last year has a really weird season, only runs 266 routes. He's banged up for most of it. 10.9% targets per route run. It completely craters. But I look at Burks and this guy goes undrafted. So I'm talking about Dotson. He's at about pick 130, if I'm not mistaken. Burks goes undrafted because of the 2023 season where his targets per out run cratered so much. And you look at this ADOT, 17.7. Like, they put him in a pure deep threat role. They only threw him balls 20 yards downfield almost. Not super efficient on that. Yards per out run craters, basically same spot as Dotson. I don't understand why Dotson goes at 130 and Burks is undrafted. If you're going to swing on somebody to bounce back, the sample on Burks is smaller. The 266 routes, I think, makes you can say, like, well, maybe they just kind of put him in a bit role as a deep threat because he was banged up last year. The 2022 is way more promising than Dotson's 2022. So anyway, that's more of a reason to, like, contextualize. Are you really going to spend on Dotson at pick 130? It's not like expensive, but if you want to make that year 3 bounce back bet, go do it with Traylon Burks at the end of the draft. And he doesn't even go drafted in most drafts. So anyway, that's the breakdown, or at least my view of the breakdown of the wide receivers from last season. Now they add Luke McCaffrey, and the next thing I'm going to present you with is the college database that we've looked at before. We'd like to dig into this. We were looking at it with Jacksonville and Brian Thomas. Luke McCaffrey, right? Famously, Christian McCaffrey's little brother. Ed McCaffrey, NFL wide receiver's son, played wide receiver early in his, played quarterback early in his career. He ended up at Rice, but he was at a different college. Oh, no. Oh, yeah, sorry. He was at Nebraska playing some quarterback early in his career. He played quarterback a little bit in his first season at Rice as well. In 2022 and 2023, these are the only seasons where he went purely to wide receiver. The columns are a little bit different on this this form here, but we see really pretty solid targets per route run, kind of actually notably solid ADOT. The average for a wide receiver is about 11. Usually with slot receivers, we would see it down at like 7 or 8. We just saw that some with Curtis Samuel. I think McCaffrey's probably a slot-only type of player, but it is notable that he had some ability to get down the field and had a higher ADOT, solid targets per out run. These are solid weighted targets per out run numbers. Caveat being he was an older prospect playing at Rice in the Conference USA and then the American Conference. The yards per target's not amazing. Yards per out run is like, it's good, but this isn't amazing for college by any means. But he was productive. And then the skill that I care about with slot receivers is agility. And he crushed the agility numbers at the combine. Let's pull up his RAS, relative athletic score. We are going to now jump to our guy, Kentley Platt, on Twitter. Luke McCaffrey, a 9.56 RAS. Down here, bottom right, composite agility grade was elite. The shuttle, his 3-cone, very, very strong. Also ran a really good 40 time, good 10-yard split. Important, again, for a slot receiver. He's not huge. The height and weight stuff is just good. He's all right sized. He's 6'1" with about 200 pounds on him. He's not necessarily like a huge vertical jumper, but solid 36-inch vertical. But the athleticism fits the profile, right? Like, he's supposed to be a slot guy, and it fits. And that's what entices me about the player. Now, it's a little trickier with a slot receiver with a mobile quarterback who tends to sometimes be more vertical and then scramble. But if they want to get him some underneath passing, if they do some of the wide, like quick hitting bubble screen type stuff, they might use McCaffrey's agility for that stuff. which that was like the whole thing with Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona was the horizontal raid. They threw a little bit to the boundary more than they actually did get vertical. And with a rookie quarterback, I'm a little concerned about Kingsbury. I'm a little concerned about the coaching for Jaden Daniels. But the biggest thing I would talk about when we spin the wheel and land on Washington is Jaden Daniels' upside is not priced in. Like, that is really exciting. The rushing ability, he's talking about potentially setting the rushing record for himself. People are concerned that he takes really big hits, and that's been a big narrative this offseason. He took some big hits at LSU. If you saw the clips, you're like, yeah, he took some big hits. But I mean, I think it's one of those things where like the clips look really bad and then we overemphasize it. They're going to try to teach him to not take big hits. They know that's an issue. They drafted him in the top 5. He goes way behind Anthony Richardson, who had 4 rushing touchdowns in his 4 games last year and showed that really high ceiling, but didn't play a lot. We looked at that when we spun Indianapolis a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, or whenever we did. He didn't play a lot. He actually played about 2 2/3 games, because both of the games he left early was after about just a third of the game. Richardson showed real scoring potential in that stretch. He also showed some of the question marks about his passing, and that's a big point about these two guys. Richardson is mobile and does have scoring potential, but we are just prorating that really small sample and saying this guy's definitely really good. Where I'll give him the edge is I do trust Shane Steichen. I trust the offense, and I'm concerned more about Cliff Kingsbury, which is why I went back to this comp when we started talking about Kingsbury. I'm a little concerned about the offense. Having said that, as prospects, the gulf between the passing profile, we talk so much about the mobility of these guys. The gulf between the passing profile of Anthony Richardson and Jaden Daniels is massive. Jaden Daniels, by all accounts, was actually a very good passer. Anthony Richardson, there were major concerns that his passing would be so bad that he might get benched, that it would be like the Trey Lance pick all over again. He showed the ability to run a lot. I have drafted some Richardson. He can break the sport the way that he scores. The gap between Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson makes no sense, though, because you actually have, and you look at them as runners in college as well. Jaden Daniels was a better runner in college. He was good. Anthony Richardson famously did not have that great of a rushing profile in college. And if the whole concern is Jaden Daniels takes too big of hits and is going to get injured, what about the fact that Anthony Richardson took some hits last year, including on a run where he scored a second touchdown of the game in week 2, invited a hit and got concussed, unfortunately, and missed the rest of that game. He was crossing the end zone. It was kind of a cheap shot, didn't need to happen, but he also definitely did not need to like allow himself to get hit by that player in that moment. It was kind of like he was like so excited to score that he kind of just beeline straight for the end zone and had like kind of a big collision and again wound up with a concussion. Not saying it's like his fault that he got concussed or anything, but I do think there's guys that like Lamar Jackson to me is such a good runner. He doesn't take those types of hits. He has incredible agility. He just avoid like his whole career has been defined by people wanting him to play other positions than quarterback. So I say this in the least derogatory way I can, but he could be an NFL running back if he couldn't throw, because he's that fast and elusive and agile. He's an elite runner of the football. I do wonder if Anthony Richardson has that type of awareness and that type of stuff. So my point is, and I wonder if Jaden Daniels has it as well. But the market is baking it in for Jaden Daniels. They're all afraid that he's going to miss time, and yet they're not for Anthony Richardson. They're only focused on the ceiling. So what I'm trying to emphasize in the Jaden Daniels conversation is focus on that ceiling, man. You got to get Jaden at this price. It's going to rise. People are going to start talking about, when I do the projections, Jaden Daniels looks amazing. I did the Luke McCaffrey thing. I was also going to do Ben Sinnott. He has some good numbers for a tight end. 22% targets per out run last year. He's a young prospect, which is good. Played some like H-back. I'm a little bit concerned about Zach Ertz being there and whether Ertz is like going to play tight end in the way that Cliff Kingsbury used him in Arizona. He's older now. Hoosier says A-Rich beefed up. Dude is big now. He was big last year. He's big. He's a big boy. He was big in college. He's very athletic. I'm not trying to dog Richardson too much. I'm just saying the things that are holding Jaden Daniels down could hold Anthony Richardson down. If we're worried about Jayden Daniels getting hurt, we have to acknowledge that Anthony Richardson got hurt in 2 of 4 games played last year and then missed the rest of the season. Like, how is Daniels that much more of an injury risk? And if it's not the injury risk that's holding Jayden Daniels down, then what's holding him down? Because he's a better passing prospect than Anthony Richardson was by a mile. He probably has better weapons around him, or it's at least close. It's not like Anthony Richardson has a massive upgrade in passing weapons around him. He does probably have a pretty big upgrade in coaching. I'll give him that, Anthony Richardson. But also the mobility element in terms of actually demonstrated rushing production. Jayden Daniels had 1,134 rushing yards last year and 10 touchdowns. Year prior, 885 and 11 touchdowns. Year prior at Arizona State, 710 and 6 rushing touchdowns. Even the 2 years prior to that, when he was really young at Arizona State, wasn't playing a ton. He combined for 578 more rushing yards and 7 more rushing touchdowns for his career over the 5 seasons. And his sophomore year, he only played 4 games. It was 2020. They only played 4 games. So he plays 12, 4, 13, 14, and 12 games. So it's a longer career than Anthony Richardson for sure. For his career, 3,307 rushing yards and 34 rushing touchdowns. And the chat's mentioning that includes sacks too, because NCAA is full of dinosaurs and counts sacks as negative rushing yards. And that's a good point. It's an important point as well, because Anthony Richardson gets talked about favorably for not taking a lot of sacks. So his rushing numbers don't get hit as hard, although Daniels, I don't think, takes a ton of sacks either. But Richardson's rushing numbers were, in his entire career, 1,116 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns. Basically, Daniels' final season in his whole career. His last season, Richardson, 654 yards and 9. The season before, 401 and 3 in only 8 games. He played a lot fewer games. So I did want to emphasize Daniels played a lot more games. But particularly over those last 2 years, in 20 games, he had about 1,000 rushing yards, which is his whole career, essentially. You know, the first season, he had 61 rushing yards that tacks on there and gets him over 1,100 in his career. But in about 20 games, he's about 1,000 rushing yards. Jayden Daniels did that in a season last year, and he had multiple other seasons that were better than Richardson's best season, you know, his final season. Jayden Daniels had 3 seasons where his rushing yardage total was comfortably better than Richardson's best season. And so, like, yeah, Richardson's really big, fast, athletic, but why didn't that manifest more, right? And then does that play into why he, when scrambling, like, took some hits and stuff? Like, that's a concern. We saw it with Daniels, and we're concerned about that with Daniels, but I'm also concerned about it with Richardson. Do I think McCaffrey is a better bet than Dotson, cost adjusted to ADP? That's how I'm playing it. Yes. Yep. Because he's cheaper, and I think he's probably a better bet straight up, frankly, to lean into the rookie upside. Maybe that's just the Kerrane effect, though. I do think Richardson is a little bit of a Kerrane effect. Kerrane loves Richardson, and we know Kerrane has a big influence on the best ball market, and rightfully so. He's the BBM3 champion. I want to look at a couple of your guys' comments here as well, if there's anything that I missed. Some stuff about Dotson's tough to get a proper read on. Ben Harvard mentioned he has a good reception perception, good open score. Maybe there's some hope there. I think you can find things with a lot of players. Dotson's the type of profile where I think you do kind of want to pack it up. Ben said, I only pick him in stacks when I'm missing Terry, and I have taken Dotson in stacks with Jayden Daniels. It's tricky because if you don't get Terry, but you want to take Jayden Daniels at a good price, and you want to be getting exposure to Jayden Daniels, that's I've just been talking about. You get that exposure to Jayden Daniels, a wide receiver who just ran 600 plus routes in his offense last year. That was a former first round pick and is only going into his 3rd year. And the team is, the organization's invested in this player, is likely going to run him out there for a ton of routes again this year. is definitely somebody that you can consider putting it into a stack. And I think this is the right way to put it. If you're going to take Dotson, you're throwing him onto a stack because you're already into Washington. And then they have the week 17 game with Atlanta, which is maybe my most drafted team this year. And so it's just a really fun way to play the week 17 correlation stuff in that Washington Atlanta game. When I was talking about Dotson and Burks, Charnicki here said that Washington sent Curtis Samuel out of town. The Titans added Boyd. Titans added Boyd really late, and Washington sent Samuel out of town and then drafted Luke McCaffrey and Ben Sinnott by the end of day 2, both of them. I'm not putting, and they also added Calvin Ridley though too. The Titans. The Titans might be completely done with Burks. I do understand that. I'm just saying, like, I think there's a possibility that he can play and has a good enough camp that he works his way into the rotation. But it is trickier for him to get the routes. I think this is a good point. I'm not trying to dog it too much, but it's a good point. I just said Dotson probably runs a lot of routes for Washington this year, and Burks very well might not. It might just be Ridley and Nuke and Tyler Boyd. Oh, Benjamin May just jumped back in and said, looks like Russell Wilson and Marshawn Lynch did it the same year as RG3 and Morris. Sorry, guys, didn't mean to mislead. It was just misremembering. But it was fun. It was fun to think about. Hoosier says, if anything, there should be more concern about A-Rich considering his injury was caused by poor decision-making. I don't necessarily agree with this. That's kind of what I was beating around the bush at, too, because I don't necessarily agree with it either, but I do kind of like, if you saw the injuries, I'm not saying it's poor decision-making, but I think people are concerned about Daniels because he invited contact that didn't injure him at LSU. He was able to take some scary looking hits, but play through them. Richardson invited some hits that he seemed to just be unaware of. That one on the running play where he got the concussion, it just surprised me, man. He didn't need to take that hit. I was bummed out for him and fantasy managers and whatever. Certainly for him and his health, first and foremost. I didn't have a lot of exposure to him. I just remember writing about it and stealing signals and being like, this guy was a hit. Like, you guys were right who drafted him. It's a bummer that he got a concussion and it could have been avoided. Like, the way that he went in on that play, you're going to cross the goal line if you like dive to the right instead of just running really upright into the hit. I also don't necessarily agree with my take. I want to be very clear. I don't think it's fair, but I do think you're saying, if anything, the more like there should probably be more concern with Richardson. He also ended up going out for not concussions, but for a shoulder thing, and that can recur. Hopefully he's, healed up, but GM Bendels, good to see ya. Historical anomalies, game theory questions about QBs in shaky situations. Given that Howell helped with regular season advancement, but was basically zero in the playoffs, would you have drafted more or less of him? I think the answer is less. I drafted a lot of him. I advanced a lot of Howell teams. They didn't win me anything. I think, because those teams end up being, it helps with advancement, but they end up being somewhat reliant on Howell's QB points. And then when they don't have them, they just don't really have much of a chance to succeed in the playoffs. Even though I had a lot of 3 QB builds with Howell last year, and I theoretically should have had 2 other good QBs, Howell was the quarterback upside for my late 3 build. So I think knowing the results, I would have drafted less of him because, knowing the results, knowing Howell's results, I would have drafted less of him. If I knew all the results, then I probably would have drafted more of him because I would have paired him with the right QBs to have some because then he could have helped me get there with, Joe Flacco. I could have paired him with Joe Flacco, somebody who started late and had some good games in the fantasy playoffs. Like, if you know the exact extreme thing, then the fact that he was a high scorer all season and got you there is helpful. But in practical terms, not knowing all of the results, just knowing that that's how Howell's profile is going to look, I don't think I would have drafted him because I don't think I could identify ways to pair him with somebody who's going to give me late season QB spike weeks, but like need to be carried to the postseason because they weren't good the whole year. So I need Howell's production to get that guy there. And then that guy's going to give me spike weeks. Like that's harder to do at QB. The guy's either good all year or he's not good. Is kind of the thing, right? Was there anything else with Washington I didn't hit? I didn't even talk about their running backs. I don't know what to make of Eckler. People are really out on him. Let's talk about the running backs for a minute. There's another Karain one where I know he loves Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson is fine. Like he's a good success rate player, but like 4.1 yards per carry last year. He was pretty good in the pass game. He had a couple long receptions. Like I know there's one where he got loose on the sideline on a dump down and had a long 51-yard long on the season. I think that was that play. That helped him to 10.2 yards per reception. Really strong catch rate. So his yards per target's 8.6. That looks really good. All of that looks really good. The average for a running back yards per target is about 6.0. So even Antonio Gibson being at 6.6 was a little above average, but Robinson looks great in that regard. I don't know that he's like anything more than just a stable play. I don't really see where his upside could be. I don't think he's that efficient. He's like a success rate guy, but not really an explosive play guy. His long run on the year was 29 yards. Like I don't think he had a lot of 20-yard carries. The year prior, his long run was 24 yards. So he's run 383 times at the NFL level and has never had a 30-yard run. He was 3.9 yards per carry as a rookie. He's at 4.0 after 2 years. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm certainly just not really giving him that he's good. His rookie year, he only had 9 receptions. That was the reason I wasn't really on him last year. That did elevate to 36 last year. I think that's tough that receiving stuff's tough to bank on with Eckler in town and a mobile quarterback. Like that's gonna go away. People are really out on Eckler because he was bad last year. He goes all the way down to 3.5 yards per carry, but he was banged up. He only played 14 games. Just the year prior, I opened the wrong window. Whoops. Thought I was showing you guys Eckler. Let's go over to Eckler. Oh, I didn't even have I didn't even have Brian Robinson's profile pulled up. I'm sorry. Eckler, 3.5 yards per carry. But just the year prior, he was, over here on the right column, you can see the awards thing. He was the 9th in the offensive player of the year voting because he led the NFL with 18 touchdowns. He led the NFL with 20 touchdowns the year prior to that. Both years pretty efficient, over 1,500 yards. The rushing was much more efficient both those years. The receiving was efficient. What if last year was just an injury-plagued season for Austin Eckler, who, by the way, is a workout warrior? Maybe he ages well because he's somebody who absolutely lives in the gym. He's been tweeting out all these pics about, don't count me out kind of stuff. He just turned 29 here in May. He's not super old. He's probably only going to be asked to play on more on like passing downs and stuff. What if he gets some of the explosion back this year? I don't think it was gone in 2022. I think it was just a slow and bad 2023. I haven't drafted Eckler yet, but I also haven't drafted a lot of Brian Robinson yet either. And a part of that is because Jaden Daniels, I think, is going to be an impact runner as a quarterback and take some of the rushing TDs and be so much of the offense that a running back split behind that is kind of tough to see huge upside on also. But I think if I had to take one of the Washington running backs, I don't know that I would be as confident in Brian Robinson as some of the people I've talked about, because I do think there's some potential, or that I've talked to, which I guess I'm just alluding to our buddy Pat Corain, is I do think there's some potential that Austin Eckler rebounds. And I do think there's some potential that Brian Robinson is just not very efficient. Like that his receiving stuff last year is really the only efficient stuff that he's shown, and the like success rate type stuff. And if the receiving is not really there anymore with a mobile quarterback, like what is he bringing? I think it's one where like Eckler could earn work throughout the year. And it's a whole new coaching staff that isn't like beholden to Brian Robinson. And Kingsbury, I mean, I don't know where I was going to go with that, but Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to think through their running backs. I don't take a lot of them. That's probably wrong. Probably one of them is going to at least be a value because they are both affordably priced. Beatwad said finally took an Eckler share at 145. At that point, I was like, all right, I'll budge. Run good Rick says, is Vidal a perfect comp to Eckler? Size, college profile, late draft capital, similar style of running. I think it's a fine comp to make as he, comes to the Chargers and maybe could replicate some of that. But they have a whole new coaching staff, so they might not be trying to replicate that. And the other thing in terms of these types of comps is like Eckler's a pretty big outlier as a late draft capital guy, and just like what he's been able to do, how high his ceiling is a pretty big outlier. So trying to find the next Eckler is, one of those tough things to actually do. But yeah, Washington running backs is a puzzle I want to think about a little bit more. I said that for like Tampa Bay, for example, and then I got off and thought more about it. And I'm so out on Rachaad White. Maybe I made that clear when we went through Tampa, but I think I'm pretty out on Brian Robinson just because I think Jaden Daniels he's not going to throw to the backs much. I just don't think there's going to be a ton of running back production. I don't think they're going to be great. They could be good, but if they're good, it's like I want the quarterback. I want Jaden Daniels. And the receivers that I want with him are probably McLaurin and then maybe some late stabs on McCaffrey and Sinnott. So kind of the way you would expect. All right. That's the Washington breakdown. We got the chat saying you're still live. Salute. I am gonna get off here in a moment. I have 6 Superflex puppies to draft. That was something I promised I'd talk a little bit about. We haven't even talked much about it all. We're gonna look at some of these puppies. I also said I would look at my completed stuff. So maybe let's just look at that real quick. Let's go to exposure. We'll click through a little. Oh, so overall, the guy that I'm absolutely highest on is Bucky Irving. Interestingly enough, this is showing all drafts, but only for... This doesn't include the eliminators and some of the other stuff where I do like it changes the exposures a little bit. I wish I could include everything. But Bucky Irving, the point I wanted to make about my 42% is I don't expect to finish at 42%. He's a guy that I absolutely am I'm not certain of anything, but I'm very confident will rise in price, and I probably won't. Yeah, it doesn't show in progress drafts, but it also doesn't show because of this NFL 2024 season is different than the NFL 2024 Eliminator season. So my 5 Eliminator drafts aren't being shown here. My 4 Superflex drafts aren't shown, and any of my pre-draft stuff isn't shown. So now it's showing 34 teams, and Bucky Irving's percentage just went up to 44.1%. But he's a guy that I won't be at near 50% on. I've done a disproportionate amount of 0 RB builds, and I've just like loved his price there. And I do think he's going to rise, and then I won't take a lot of him. If he stays this cheap all year, I maybe will have 35% Bucky at the end. But right now, it's just like once he rises, I'll still draft him as well. But I'll probably draft him in like 20% of drafts, and then he winds up in in the high 20s or something. Like this is the first 34 teams in this portfolio. This isn't going to be the whole portfolio, obviously. Over at QB, Brock Purdy is my highest drafted QB. It's pretty flat. Brock Purdy is my highest drafted at 20.6. Not really intentionally, but I like getting QB in that pocket. And he obviously was like in the MVP discussion for a while last year. Can spike touchdowns for a pocket passer. You want a guy who can spike touchdowns. Bo Nix is my next highest one. I take him a lot very, very late. I think he's a good bet to start 17 games, a much better bet than some of the other rookies. And I think that's going to start to get reflected in the ADP eventually. Like Drake May, I'm actually pretty worried about. They already named Jacoby Brissett the starter. And I guess I already mentioned this earlier in the stream, but they're talking a little bit about like this situation's not great for him to play in. Bo Nix is like they're in a completely different spot in their organization. This type of context is relevant. It's not just relevant that Drake May went 3rd and Bo Nix went 12th. The context of the teams is relevant. And for the Broncos, they have so much dead money from the Russell Wilson contract this year. Their whole thing in 2024 is to just be a little bit better, to show a little bit of improvement from last year, and to build Nix. Sean Payton's going to want him to get reps. There's no real reason to play Zach Wilson or Jarrett Stidham at all, unless Bo Nix is just horrible. But they drafted him to be their quarterback of the future. And they do think they have the infrastructure around him, and they're trying to build. And I just think Sean Payton's that type of personality. Like, it's just the stuff coming out of New England is concerning for May. The default should be for a guy like Nix that he's going to play. They liked him a lot. Aaron Rodgers, don't really love taking him, but I take a lot of Garrett Wilson, and he's cheap, and so he winds up being my QB in some backdoor stuff. Kyler Murray is one I really actually do like. Trevor Lawrence, I really like some bounce back upside, and he stacks a lot of different ways, and he's in that same price range as Purdy. Justin Herbert, Derek Carr, and Bryce Young, two more later round quarterbacks where I feel good about the games played element, which is something that matters early on. Tua, yeah, chat says don't see Jaden, got to pump those numbers up. I'm surprised how low I am on Jaden. Like, I've only drafted him like 6% here in this first batch. I have him in something else, like the Superflex stuff. I took him on one of those 4 teams. I think I maybe I don't know if I took him in the Eliminator. Anyway, he might be in some in progress stuff. I think actually would bet that he's on some in progress teams. Because I know I took him more than this. But yeah, that was one of my very first things. So anyway, the rest of the QBs kind of spread out. I was just mentioning some guys that I got down into guys that I was only at 12% on. Herbert, Derek Carr, Bryce Young. Running back, Bucky Irving at the top. Tyrone Tracy is just behind Bucky Irving in price and also a really nice ad. I wrote that article over at the Stealing Signal Substack about hammering rookie upside in all formats. Bucky Irving, Tyrone Tracy. My 4th highest exposure running back is Marshawn Lloyd. My 5th is Kamani Vidal. I mean, it's 4 rookies at the top 5. Kendre Miller, hammering. Somebody in the chat asked about Roschon Johnson. I did not realize I was as high on Roschon Johnson. I do think Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert are too cheap. I was trying to balance them, and I think probably as the other drafts come in that Herbert will go up and Roschon will come down. But I think once Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy are off the board, those 2 Chicago Bears running backs are probably 2 of the best late round picks because DeAndre Swift not particularly healthy, good offense. They're going to both be there still, so they're not going to like immediately step into huge roles. But I do think it's going to be a valuable backfield. Marshawn Lloyd, I mentioned, Kendre Miller, 2 guys that I love. We've talked a lot about on stream. I have a good amount of Kyron in the early range because I took none of him in the pre-draft stuff because I talked about in my Substack that I thought they were going to draft a running back and his price would go down, which is what happened. I started taking the discount, taking him in the 3rd round when he fell, a little bit in the late 2nd even. Charbonnet, DeAndre Swift. I do like playing Swift as well, but I'm probably going to ease off this number of Swift. I've gotten into Dobbins quite a bit after talking to Sean a little bit about that. Just, I mean, we want to be right on the Chargers running back room. I've even thought about Isaiah Spiller, man. And I don't think we want to pay the Gus Edwards price. I think you want to do it cheaply. So Vidal and Dobbins is the way that I like to play that. Take Bigsby, Mostert, Tyjae Spears, Javonte Williams. Got to get those numbers up. Ray Davis, another rookie that I have a solid exposure to. Jonathan Brooks at 15%. Chase Brown, only 12%. Again, I expect that to come up as more drafts finish. I've taken a lot of Chase Brown. That seems weird. Over at receiver, Rashee Rice is the top guy. Malik Neighbors, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Xavier Worthy are tied at the next spot. Rice, another guy where I won't probably finish this high, but I fully expect his price to rise, so I'm willing to keep hammering him right now. Definitely just think he's mispriced. Neighbors, JSN, Worthy are guys that I'm just going to want to have exposure to this year for sure. Big breakout plays, fit the profile of guys that you would expect me to draft if you've been paying attention to any of my work for the last 8 years. Zay Flowers, Christian Kirk. Kirk's one I've talked about being more of an offensive, like projections-based, when I say offensive, meaning like what the offense is. I also just don't love that pocket of receivers. It's like right after, like I take him over like George Pickens sometimes, so I reach up a little bit to get Kirk. I think he could have a really nice year. with we talked about the Jaguars, the vertical element of the outside receivers, etc. Demarcus Robinson, really high on him, 17%. I don't think there's another receiver in the really late rounds that I'm as confident will run as many routes as I am. Robinson will, and could consolidate a good amount of secondary receiving work because, yeah, Puka and Cooper Kupp are going to be everything, but I mean, Robinson got some decent targets late. They really like him as a blocker. They gave him a bunch of money. He fits into the stacks. Like when I have like a Trey McBride, he's a nice bring back. Trey Benson, he's a nice bring back. There's a lot of Arizona stuff, Kyler, that he's a nice bring back on. So, I mean, I'm probably going to just keep taking Demarcus Robinson. I'm pretty comfortable taking him over close to like 18%. Benjamin May says no New York Giants wide receiver stance. Malik Neighbors was up there at the top. Later rounds, I do have Wandale will come in higher. I've been taking more Wandale. He's at 11.8% right now, though. So he's a little bit ahead of ADP. I'm not taking Jalen Hyatt or Darius Slayton really at all. So that's kind of how I'm playing the Giants. Other guys at this 11.8% number, Tyler Lockett, T. Higgins, Jacoby Myers, Keon Coleman, Jerry Jeudy. Talked about him a little bit on Stealing Bananas, but like comfortably outside the wide receiver window, but probably should be inside of it. Cortland Sutton, Curtis Samuel, Drake London, Devontae Walker, another late upside swing, Tank Dell, Chris Olave, Rondale Moore. I'd probably be higher on Olave if I hadn't already taken. He's one of my highest owned guys in the pre-draft stuff. And then his price rose, so I haven't had to be all over him necessarily. Jalen Waddle. Marvin Mims is a bit higher. Stephon Diggs, Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, Jamar Chase, Javon Baker. I'm just reading all these for the audio listeners. Javon Baker, Roma Dunze, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson, DJ Chark, Devontae Adams, and Joshua Palmer. So Chark and Palmer are the other two guys that are a little bit later picks. I do think you want to play the Chargers receiving game where you can because it's so affordable. I've talked before about Palmer being a play I'm comfortable with after a better year 3 than his first 2 seasons. And then at tight end, it's the elites for the most part. Kittle, Kincaid, McBride. You guys know I love Kincaid and McBride. A lot of Kittle in this little window, in this pocket of teams. Brock Bowers, Cole Kmet, Travis Kelce, Kyle Pitts. Less Pitts than I want. I'm going to bump that up. Mark Andrews is the one of the 7 that I'll be lowest on, and I'm very comfortable with that. We'll talk about that more maybe another time. Luke Musgrave, Kmet are the preferred later round options. Some Schultz and Njoku, those guys. Oh, I'm pretty low on Laporta as well. Not really intentionally, but man, he's pricey when you can just go get like Kincaid and McBride a little later. I will probably bump up the Laporta number as well now that I see that. The Greyhound team I drafted was kind of fun. We'll just look at the full team. It's a Kyler Murray, Aaron Rodgers, Daniel Jones team. I took Kyron Williams a little behind ADP. Let's just go look at the board. It was a Garrett Wilson from pick 8 and Devontae Adams on the way back, and then Kyron falls all the way to late 3. Trey McBride on the way back gives me a Rams Arizona thing. I get Xavier Worthy in late 5, Roma Dunze, Rashee Rice in later 7. I was really loving some of these values. I was like, man, I miss in fast drafts. It feels like you can get some guys to kind of fall to some spots that you like them. I grabbed Kyler in 8 at pick 89. We were just talking a little bit ago about me trying to push Kyler to like 82 in one of my drafts. Brock Bowers, Tyjae Spears, Kendre Miller, Zach Charbonnet. Bowers is that tight end 2 to make it a 2 tight end build. Aaron Rodgers, again, a great example of where I just had to backdoor a second QB, and I had Garrett Wilson at the top. Ray Davis then becomes a good pick as the bring back Buffalo play. Bucky Irving, I just take every time I can. Wan'Dale Robinson, DJ Chark, and then I grabbed Daniel Jones in the very last round to just add some more QB upside and kind of protection for both Rodgers and Kyler being not the healthiest QBs. Had grabbed Wan'Dale. Really like that team. Don't have a bring back on the Giants thing that I did late, but I have bring backs on both the Arizona and Jets things, have full game stacks there. And I had some week 16 and 15 stuff in there. So that was a fun live draft that I did. I also said I would show some of the Superflex stuff. Although we're gonna run out of time because we got ship chasing coming up. But yeah, overall, so I have Chase Brown in 3 of my 4 Superflex teams. So that's where some of my Chase Brown exposure is. I mentioned I've been drafting more of him elsewhere. Took some Blake Watson with the extra round. And because I'm doing a lot of Cincinnati Denver stuff in this format, a lot of Bo Nix in this format. And then I took a couple Burrow teams, or one Burrow team, it looks like. Took a Dylan Laube play in one of these because I think I had a Derek Carr. So the extra, I'm still just taking the elite tight ends. I took 2 Andrews. I did take some late stacked. So this is a Bryce Young. I took a Jatavian Sanders really late. I took a Dulcich with a Bo Nix really late. I drafted Jake Ferguson. Hope you're happy. Everybody loves Jake Ferguson. Jonnu Smith was a 2 team, just throwing on some late tight ends on some spots where I didn't get the 2 elite tight ends. 2 Gabe Davises. It's gross. Not quite sure why that happened. Probably just Trevor Lawrence teams where I didn't get the other stacks completed. Yeah, he did it. It was a Dak team. I already knew I had Dak because it's Superflex, and I didn't really want to go to like Brandon Cooks. So I drafted Jake Ferguson, and I hated myself for it. All right, let's go finish up because I got another show coming up. There's a few of these puppy but Superflex to jump into. This one's already in the 4th round. I started with CJ Stroud at 106, and then I got Jaden Daniels at 19. The tricky thing here is they both have a week 14 bye. So immediately putting a lot into the quarterback room, and they have the same bye. Drake London comes in the 3rd round and is, Puka Nacua went 1 pick before me. It would have been fantastic to get him too. But London, I took over Harrison, some of the other guys, because in part he pairs with Jaden Daniels nicely. I did the star method here, start a ton of guys to be like, these are guys that I would love to have on this team to keep in mind who my quarterbacks are. So Nico Collins is actually the top guy by ADP on this team. It's a CJ Stroud team. Derrick Henry is the only other correlated guy high, and then it goes down to Diggs. Really no reason not to grab Nico Collins here as my 2nd wide receiver with the Stroud. Keep in mind, this is a 2 wide receiver format. It's a super flex, but only required to start 2 receivers, 2 running backs, 1 regular flex, 1 super flex. If you use a receiver in super flex, you can still start 4 receivers, but you don't have to start 3. You could just start 2, and you could be flexing. Your regular flex could be a running back or a tight end. You could be super flexing a quarterback. The way that I'm playing that is I'm more likely to be a little thinner at receiver early, more likely to take an elite running back in some spots. But I do still want elite receivers. I kind of want to do like stars and scrubs at receiver. I don't think you really want to be building a massive amount of depth necessarily, but a good amount of depth at receiver. This one was another Stroud at 110. I took Amon-Ra in the 2nd round. We're now late in the 3rd. Quarterbacks come flying off. Jared Goff did go. I would have considered him with Amon-Ra there. I didn't do the star method in this one and get through all of the stuff. Best QB available is Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. I'm going to push QB2 in this one a little bit. I want to try some builds where I do 1 elite quarterback and push QB2 a little bit. I think this pick's going to be Achane. I don't have a lot of him across formats. This is a little bit more of a running back format. Both Ayuk and Chris Olave there would be interesting plays. But you also have Devonta Adams, Nico Collins hanging around. Nico's probably the play with Stroud at 403. Miami and Houston play in the playoffs, right? I don't know week 15 and 16 matchups as well as I should. Yeah, Miami and Houston play in week 16. No, week 15. Houston plays the Chiefs in week 16 and plays the Ravens in week 17. But Miami, HN gives me a little bit of a bring back on a Houston thing for week 15, which helps the advance conversation. I want to take HN, just mostly because I wanted to draft him on a team. I haven't drafted him a lot. Think he fits that build, though. We're going to talk a lot more about the the Superflex best ball on my next stream. I got to get running here because I want to eat a little bit of food before I'm not leaving right this second, but before the top of the hour. So I'm going to do some picks really quick in the next 5 to 10 minutes, leave myself 5 minutes to grab a little bite to eat. Some of these questions in the chat, if you guys don't mind throwing them in the comments, I will go through later and answer all of the comments. I've been doing that on all these streams, so that's always a way. Late in the stream, if I don't get to your question or if I missed one earlier, just throw it in the comments. I'd love to chat. I love to answer you guys' questions. You guys know that. This team is an Anthony Richardson, and then Bijan Robinson comes all the way back to 20, which I think is a nice value in this format where the running back, I'm looking for a legendary running back season out of him. Richardson is tricky at 105. I debated that big time. It was 4 QBs in the first 4. I could have went with any position player. I could have taken McCaffrey. I could have taken anything. I don't really like that pick. I wish I would have went McCaffrey, or I wish I would have went, Lamb or something. Back up, to add insult to injury, Tua is a really nice pick here because you can still play Waddle later. I don't know if Waddle would make it back. But if I had gone like McCaffrey, Bijan, Tua, that would be a fun start. I don't know where else I would go, but taking Tua as my QB2, which is fine. Anytime you have good quarterback value, it's sort of worth taking. I don't think I have to go RB here. Achan's an option. It's a little higher than the spot I was in my last draft. Wide receiver, Harrison and Drake London are options. Not really into the tight end range at this point yet. If I take Tua and don't get Waddle at 44, which he very well may not come back to. His current ADP is 42, and it's kind of steamy. He tends to go a little higher. Achan will be gone. Tyreek will be gone. I will have Tua sort of unstacked. I'll have to do like some late round Tua stuff. Have Bijan, but the thing is Cousins probably doesn't even come back. So if I go take London and I start to build out an Atlanta thing here, Cousins isn't going to make it back to me. There's no Richardson correlated play. It's like you don't go to Michael Pittman at this point. Pittman's way down at 56 anyway. I think I would rather play Richardson late with Josh Downs or A.D. Mitchell. This is a tricky spot. Could consider just going to Herbert to make it more stackable. I'm going to take Tua. If Waddle goes, that'll be tough, but I can find some other ways to play Miami later. I don't think I absolutely have to have the really high-priced Dolphins players with Tua. I would really like to. But because they're so expensive, I don't know. With how concentrated it is, you really want to have one of them. So I'm really hopeful for Waddle. If I don't get him, Tua's maybe more of an advance rate player, and I have to find other stacks for the weeks 15, 16, 17. It's kind of gross to have an advance rate player that high. because you're not really winning if he goes nuts in the playoffs against teams that have him stacked up. Hoping we get Waddle there. This is one where I started with Jalen Hurts at the 102, and I'm back up. All right, top QB here at 211 is Tua by ADP. So that's why, I liked the price a little bit in the later third. I still have A.J. Brown and Puka Nacua and Garrett Wilson sitting there. Man, I like Puka and Garrett Wilson over Brown, but with Jalen Hurts, I think my hand's kind of forced where this is a good opportunity for me to play some A.J. Brown. Get that little stack. This is one where I started with Josh Allen. I'm at the 2-3 turn. I'm at 212. Garrett Wilson, I can take in this one because he is a bring back for Josh Allen. I don't even want to think about that. Snap him up. The other values here are Brock Purdy and Tua. Again, to get Purdy at 25 is kind of nice, but I don't think I would be able to stack him up. I guess Kittle I would be able to play later. But Ayuk and Debo aren't going to come back. I would maybe have had to go Purdy Ayuk here, but I want Garrett Wilson. Same issue like wide receiver where you're at Harrison, Drake, London, a little bit thin to take over a high-end quarterback. Jonathan Taylor is an intriguing pick here because I do still think he's a pretty high ceiling running back. I think the pick for me here is Purdy or Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to take Purdy. I just think I could play Kittle later. I like to go in the tight end spot. Picking out of the ends in a super flex, you can be exposed to QB runs. There's a possibility by the 4-5 turn, kind of already wiped out. I kind of like just breaking the tie with the scarce position there. I don't have to have Jonathan Taylor on this build by any means. This is a team where I started CeeDee Lamb, Jaden Daniels, and then I took Kirk Cousins in 3, in part because it was a pretty heavy quarterback run. Stafford, Rodgers, and Watson go. Baker Mayfield now the best available quarterback. I'm pretty comfortable with having grabbed a quarterback in 3 there, although you can push it, and you can just play QB2 through like Bryce Young, Derek Carr, Bo Nix. Maybe didn't have to go there. It does make, because London's already off the board, it makes Kyle Pitts kind of a priority, although this is a 20-round draft, so Rondale Moore is very draftable. Darnell Mooney would be draftable, certainly. Devon Achane still here at 405. Nico Collins still here at 405. Because a lot of QBs have gone here. I actually have Daniels and Cousins as week 17 opponents, both the QBs already, so it'll be easy to stack all that up. I know people don't love that necessarily, but in a super flex, if they both go off, it's great. They can both hit my lineup. Lamb, I don't have anything that really has to correlate here. It could be Nico. It could be Achane. I just took some Nico on the Stroud team, so I'm going to grab another share of Achane in the 4th round. He's a fun pick. Then we got a team here. Anthony Richardson, Amon-Ra, St. Brown start. Not as heavy quarterbacks yet, I don't think. We're basically at that spot I was at in the last draft, but in the 3rd round where I took Cousins. He is the top available QB. I feel like there's a little bit of a drop-off after Deshaun Watson down to Baker Mayfield, or a pretty big one, I should say. So I think it can make sense to try to hit that pocket. But I just did that in the other draft. I don't have to do it here. Drake London makes it all the way to this pick in this draft. He didn't in the other draft. I love London in this spot. He's a guy in regular drafts I'm taking at the 1-2 turn. So I get London with Amon-Ra, Anthony Richardson. Again, you only have to start the 2 receivers, but you still want the elites. They're the guys that we know are good and tend to be good. And so in Superflex, I really like 0 RB builds when possible. I don't mind, stacking putting, because there's only 2 starting receiver slots. I don't mind putting in an anchor running back, but then it's going to be an anchor running back and wait, right? But the idea is use your capital at receiver to get some studs, at QB certainly, and then I think still at elite tight end to free up some roster space. Got 2 more drafts, 7 minutes till the top of the hour. Lamar Jackson, Caleb Williams, Garrett Wilson came to me in the 3rd round. Nico almost all the way back to me in the 4th. Wow, Achan's going to be available in this draft too. And I've got the... Do I have an Achan correlation? I don't know if I do. Start a bunch of players, bring back on Baltimore like Stephon Diggs, Caleb Williams. Drake and try to get Cousins on the way back. Tiger Uppercut asked for that last draft. I was in the back of my mind thinking maybe that happens. I don't know if it actually will. You really got to think through these. I don't really want to snap pick here because okay, this isn't Stroud. I have the Houston bring back question. I don't have to have it. I'm looking at DJ Moore and the Caleb Williams thing. I have a bunch of guys starting the queue that correlate one way or another that kind of have ADPs in this range. So like it maybe doesn't make sense to take the Achan value. Because at this turn, maybe I want to get 2 correlated players. I mean, even like Zay Flowers won't come back to the 6th. So I kind of want to plot out these next couple rounds, but unfortunately, I don't really have time to do it. So I'm not going to make this pick. I have a 7-hour window on it. I want to look at that. Let's look at the other draft real quick, though. Maybe I'll make that pick to close us out here. Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott, Jonathan Taylor. Kind of a weird start. Need a receiver. Devontae Adams is the top available option. I don't really have stack plays for Dallas or KC. KC plays Miami, right? No. KC and Miami both play Houston, is what I just looked at. This is another one that I might have to just let sit and think about a little bit. Yeah. Miami, KC's no correlation. So it's not Waddle. It's going to be a receiver on this team. Unless it's Kelsey. Sam Laporta already went. I got Mahomes. I love to play all of Mahomes pass catchers, but I could just keep pushing wide receiver. All right. Kelsey, I don't think comes back for sure or anything. His ADP is 48.9. I don't pick again until 55. It's a little ahead of ADP for him, but I like playing the elite tight ends. Yeah, me Watts says KC plays Pittsburgh. I was thinking about weeks 15 and 16 as well. All right, I'm going to take Kelsey on this team. I do feel pretty good about that pick. I like these receivers, but one of them probably comes back to me in the 5th. I want to get the correlated piece here. People are going to continue to take quarterbacks. Everything goes. I'm not certain that one of these like really high-end guys like Adams, Debo, or Waddle gets back to me. But even if I'm taking like a Stephon Diggs or a Malik Neighbors in the next round as my wide receiver 1, I'm okay with that. Kelsey's a pretty exciting player to put on a Patrick Mahomes team. So that's going to be the last one. I got 3 minutes to go eat some food. I appreciate you guys hanging out. Any additional questions that I missed, throw them in the comments. You guys rule. This has been a blast. We'll do more of this. Keep those notifications on. Subscribe. Like the stream before you go. Come join us at Ship Chasing in 2 minutes. And we will see you there. All right. Where's the outro? There it is.